So I'm calling this meeting to order. This is a special meeting, June 5, 2018. The purpose of the special meeting work session is to discuss Board and Association Operations Resolution 5, Board staff relationships, and to discuss recreation facilities analysis. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous.
I'm just going to step out.
Okay, member comments. Do we have any members? Arvin? Okay. The only member does not wish to speak. Okay, good. Moving on to the next agenda item. This is good. Now we have caught up. Board and Association Operations Resolution 5, Board Staff Relationships. John Mooney.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You've all received more materials than you ever wanted to receive. And you may have even read some of them. But to simplify tonight's task, in the shortest way, our task is to fill out a matrix that has 32 cells, 10 of which should take less than 15 seconds. Okay? But that matrix, the purpose of the matrix, and that's our task, to fill that out. That matrix then will guide the Board Governance Committee in drafting a revision of Operations Resolution 5 on the relationship between board and staff. So without a lot of words, and we have to do it because of the new relationship we have defined between the board and the in-house counsel. But there are other issues that came up in the course of last year about the relationship of the board with CFO, with the CEO, with staff that deserve clarification. So that's why we have to do it, why it is good to do it. So I hope everyone has had a chance to read through at least some of the material. Larry, could you throw the authority matrix up on the board here? It's unfair. So basically, I propose 4 steps. We will give a very brief explanation of the authority matrix, which is what authorities the board or others exercise with regard to 4 offices. Those offices are the CEO, the CFO, the general counsel, and other RA staff. And the various authorities are to hire, fire, discipline, to set salary, day-to-day supervision, annual work plan, performance appraisal, purchase approval, small work assignments and inquiries, major work assignments and inquiries. These are typically the neuralgic points in an organization like ours where confusion can set in. So so that we've already discussed it. It will come up on the board shortly. The second thing is that fairly clear? It's fairly intuitive. So 32 cells that we have to fill out, some very quickly. Secondly, we propose discussing what are the essential characteristics we believe we need for a successful authority relationship between RA officials, and gave some examples. They might be efficiency, effectiveness, clear lines of authority, whatever that might be. Thirdly, we're going to discuss, actually I would like not to discuss, the various organizational models that were handed out, summarized in the 2 matrices, one having to do with the relationship of the board to the general counsel, the other with the relationship to the CEO and other staff. But it shows how different organizations doing it, beginning with our own current Resolution 5, and then talking about how Fairfax County does it, how Arlington County does it, how, according to Ken Chadwick, many other common interest communities deal with it, and then how we want to deal with it. I will say right now, and if I did not find Columbia's information very helpful for us, it's a very different structure. So if someone wants to bring it up, they can. I don't think it's necessary.
I might comment on that.
And then finally, the fourth thing is we'll jointly fill out the authority matrix. Does that make sense? If we do it quickly, we can do it in an hour and a half or more quickly.
Or faster,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, good.
So
6:15.
that's not the one I'm thinking of, Larry. It's the one I'm thinking of is this guy.
The little one, okay.
The one that
Separate
needs to
one
be
you sent
filled
out?
out?
Yeah.
Ray, do you happen to have an extra paper copy? For chance?
Okay,
Right here.
Does
How do you-
does that agenda make sense for this item?
good, that's good.
Okay.
I have a
So-
question.
Okay.
Oh,
So just clarification, do you want a live copy to be able to fill out?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that
be
we
cool.
can fill out on.
I think there's a
I
Word
may have been
version,
unclear.
isn't
I thought we were going to fill it out as we looked at it.
Okay, so what I'll do, let me pull it up right now, I'll have to go drop that into
Okay.
Common as a Word document.
Yeah, we can have the discussion in the meantime, and I might actually be able to email it to you. There was a draft, it hasn't changed at all, right? The one that you sent out, John?
No.
It's the same one, right?
Yeah.
I can email it to you if you can. pull it
There
up
we have it right there.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
And what preceded it was a sample of what it might look filled out.
Yeah.
isn't that in this
It just came-
packet? It's in the packet.
It is,
yeah.
it is,
It
yeah.
is.
Packet's
It
out
came on
there.
Friday,
Yeah, yeah.
Except this is a PDF copy, so, but I can,
But you can
So-
write on it.
So
no, but
we can, but this way we would all
we're
see and
recording
agree
it?
to what's being written, okay?
John, didn't you send out a Word version of it?
I did, I did.
Yeah.
I can email it to you if you can pull it up
About
there.
halfway.
There's a Word version that John sent that you should have in your email.
Yeah.
That you sent not too long after Larry sent out
Yeah.
the packet.
For me to pull it up here most effectively, I need to drop it in the Common file.
Oh,
Pull it off of that, drop it in there and pull it up.
I'm going to be quiet and you do it the way you think is best.
okay, all right.
Okay. Well,
So it'll just take a couple minutes.
while you're doing that, I propose that we use our time by talking about what are the qualities we most want our lines of authority to have here, okay? Is that a,
That's good.
Yeah.
Let's get started.
so, and I will take notes,
Okay?
okay, unless someone else wants to
I have
do
a
that.
general question before we get into that, and this may be a really stupid question, but I understand the need to be expedient with regard to the establishing the relationship with the general counsel, because there you are, but does it make any sense to, and I know all we're doing tonight is our goal is to fill out the matrix, but before we do anything concrete, to wait until the new CEO is in place to perhaps involve him or her in these discussions?
We could discuss that. Go ahead, Sridhar. I would say it's important for us to do it before the CEO.
Before, so that we can communicate to the CEO what the,
Because
Right.
they act on behalf of
Right.
us.
Right.
And the CEO reports to the board, so we should be defining what relationship
Right.
we think the board.
And if
should
asked during the
Because
interviews, how does
they
it
probably
work?
would like to know.
We need to be able to tell them how it works.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're also hiring a CFO. We need to be able to tell the CFO how it works.
Right.
agreed.
Okay.
Okay, who
So-
wants to go
Good
first?
question.
So John, set us up again with, is this the brainstorm of the values?
Right, yeah.
Values of.
And Sherry just said values of, so that if you could
So
define one
it-
more time,
Sorry if I missed it.
that's okay?
So either values, or we might say qualities, that we want to look for in the norms for governing the authority relationships among the various offices. So for example, clear lines of authority is one I'll toss out.
Yep.
So we have absolutely clear line of authority.
So I think it really depends on the position, right? So let me take a stab first, because while people are gathering their thoughts. CEO, it is pretty straightforward. It is to the board of directors. So that's, within that, there may be some nuances that we can talk about. But to me, CEO is a pretty straightforward relationship with the board. Really, as we go into the CFO and the general counsel is where we have some questions on how it is structured. So we've seen Bob Zine's comment from Fairfax County. We've got some other comments, Arlington County, and we've looked at some others as well. Right? We've had this discussion. From my corporate public company perspective, especially in the last 10, 11 years, having an independent line of communication with the board, even if it's not daily, but on a periodic basis, having that access, that line of communication, I think is very important from a check and balance perspective.
And you're speaking specifically of the CFO position?
Both the positions, both general counsel as well as the CFO.
Is this along
Has
the
to
lines
have.
of that, noses in, hands out kind of
I disagree with Eddie on some of the way he
things that we've talked
discusses
about?
it. Again, his perspective is his perspective. My perspective is, coming from, Port Sarbanes-Oxley, large public company background. It is set up differently. So I would say that both the general counsel as well as, in this case specifically, I think it seems like community associations as well as the Fairfax County is really structured such that the general counsel is hired by the board of directors.
Well, isn't that basically what we did?
Here, well,
Well, that's what we've done, but we haven't changed the resolution to reflect as yet. That is what we are trying to do here.
Position in
Right.
place.
The second part of it is really CFO. CFO absolutely has dual reporting responsibility from, again, from my experience, it's not used all the time. Quarterly, there's a meeting with the board. Primarily, the audit committee is where it typically happens. And all it is an independent meeting where the CFO is asked, is there anything that makes you uncomfortable? You've probably seen this, Andy. Is there anything that you need to report? Is there anything that you need to, that makes you uncomfortable to you? And they do that in a public company setup, through multiple, SEC filings are done every quarter. And each of those are independent certification from a CFO perspective, CEO perspective, as well as the board of directors. So that there is a formal structure in place for such assertions to actually happen on an independent basis. And one person can say no, and effectively that grounds the reporting without, you have to have appropriate disclosures when such things happen. And there is a reason for that, because you don't want just one person, directing the affairs completely, and the directors who are ultimately responsible to the public shareholders, in this case, the members, being blindsided, when something blows up.
Sridhar,
So-
may I?
Just
Okay.
to add to that, I just want to, I'll finish this and then maybe we can talk about this. Providing that access is the most important thing. I think having that check and balance, having that access means that somebody will pick up the phone and call. How does it get implemented? It's
I'm sorry, would you clarify direct access of whom?
direct access to the board.
On the
Either
part of whom?
On the part of CFO as well as the general counsel. It's not day-to-day, but there's got to be a mechanism where they have to be able to report, and that's why dual reporting. And we can go into the specific areas where they would actually do that. And in practice, it typically works as a quarterly setup. Only when there is a very challenging circumstance that a CFO or a general counsel will go directly to the board member when they feel that the CEO is not acting in the interests of the primary stakeholders, which switches between debt holders, between basically creditors as well as shareholders and, in our case, members. So that changes, and I think we need to be mindful and make sure that the structure supports, that independent reporting when needed. Okay, go ahead.
So let me clarify what the task is in this part of the, it's not to discuss particular positions. It's to say, what are the qualities we want? So it might be, for example, as you said, checks and balances. Or it might be
Access.
It might be transparency. So before we get into talking too much about particular things, I think it would be good to talk about the values or the characteristics that we want to assure that whatever we come up with are reflected in each of the relationships we draw. Is that clear? I think that's a useful exercise.
So Again, I agree with that. Again, at the end of the day, it's about effective relationships. And when I was thinking about this task, as you laid out earlier, John, I thought about three things that popped to mind right away. First one is role clarity, so that people understand what their roles are. There's not a lot of fuzziness. There's not a lot of gray. Am I stepping on this one? Am I stepping on this? That there'll always be some, but it's fairly strong role clarity is key to an effective relationship at a work environment, I believe. Also, certainly goes out saying communication paths, which is, I guess, what we're trying to structure today in both the formal and the informal communication paths, because there's both, and there'll always be both in a workplace. And how do we structure those? And finally, one that comes up over the longer term, right, which is trust. And if there's a trusting relationship between the different parties, then there can be more nuance in some of the informal and formal communication paths. And again, in some of the notes that were in the readings, certainly there again, they talked about, there's one school of thought that would say that if the CFO diverges enough from the CEO's thought pattern about going to the board, that the CFO would resign. And that in itself would be a statement to the board, as long as the CFO doesn't say it's for family or medical reasons or something, but has to say, hey, I am now at a point where I can no longer effectively
Perform my
work for the
duties.
CEO and do my job, and I have to resign. Obviously, that's a very telling statement there. So there's one school of thought, rather than having separate lines of communication with the CFO to the board. But there's also, again, this trusting relationship, and if it's working as it should, that there's going to be, the CEO and CFO working in concert and getting the correct information to the board so that there's the correct data points to make strategic decisions. I think it sounds like, sweetheart, you were getting down the path of when that doesn't work anymore, how do we effectively put guardrails around it?
Yeah, so if I can just, quickly, clarify something. Under Securities Exchange Commission rules, you have to have, the CFO does meet with the audit committee completely independent of the CEO. Doesn't have to share exactly what he or she is going to share with the audit committee. It is likewise the auditors as well as the internal auditor will meet with the audit committee completely alone. So this is normal process that is set up, and if the CFO signs the 902 certification on a quarterly basis, you've got the outside counsel and the general counsel sitting with the person, not the CEO, not anyone else. So it is set up that way because of post Enron, WorldCom.
Mm-hmm.
You have these formal structures in place so that there is this independent line, and typically those things don't last a long time. It's like 5 minutes. The audit committee, you tell the audit committee everything is fine. There's nothing to report, and you're gone.
Okay.
But that it has to be set up beyond the trust. To your point, you're absolutely right. But beyond the trust, there is a requirement that you're actually following that process at that
Okay.
point.
Thank you. Julie?
One word that came to my mind, and I thought as Andy was talking, it got encapsulated in that, was access. I want my CFO, my CEO, my general counsel to feel that they do have access to the board. And I know we touched upon that a little bit in the more formalized whistleblower policy, but that's kind of taking it to a step maybe that I'm not intending, because a whistleblower implies that there's something amiss, as opposed to feeling that you have these communication paths that are formal and informal. But they do reflect that access, and it does reflect, again, the trust that I feel as a CFO that I have the ability to come, directly to the board. And I don't necessarily have to check that in with the CEO. I don't know whether our thought is headed towards a path of kind of like a trio of the council, the CEO, and the CFO almost on a parallel kind of, responsibility element, or not. I know that we've certainly in the last couple of years have felt that we needed more insight into the financial component to reflect things, but that might have been a temporary blip on the screen. And I don't want us to overreact when I still think, we want,
Sorry.
we want the CEO, to be an effective manager and to feel like they have control of the ship, if you will, right? I mean, we don't want to, at least I don't wish to get into the nitty-gritty of managing RA. I'm a board of directors. I'm not a day-to-day hands-in. I expect a certain level of professionalism and ethics in doing their job. I don't know if that kind of gets to some of the qualities or values that you were thinking about.
Okay. Anyone else?
Sherry?
I'm sorry, I'm having technical issues.
Well,
Only if you're willing, Madam HR person, to enter in some comments.
Karen, do you want to make any
Do you have any
comments?
comments?
I'm a little bit concerned about the notion that the CFO could come to the board without the knowledge of the CEO. Is that what you were suggesting, Sridhar?
Well,
That's not what I'm suggesting.
Am I getting off the track?
well, not necessarily, you're expressing a concern that we're going to have to discuss. The precise question at hand is, what are those qualities that you want to make sure define all of the relationships?
Let me pose a scenario to your question, right?
Okay, sure. Could we, rather than continue to talk about the CFO, could we, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
talk about this part, and then we will quickly get into
Okay,
question.
which part? Which?
Values and qualities.
the values and qualities we want to typify our structure of relationships of authority between various officials. And then with that general, so kind of knowing what are the preoccupations of the board members, I think we can more fruitfully have a framework for discussing how we resolve each of the relationships. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I would just second everything that's been said already with 2 seconds for role clarity, which is what we're actually getting into right now. Open communication and mutual trust, leadership qualities, specifically in the case of the CEO, and transparency, all the things that have been said already.
I think transparency
Okay,
is one
thank
of those
you.
interesting words. It means so many different things to people.
Yeah.
Okay, Sherry?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you guys have pretty much nailed it. We got to have clear lines. There's got to be clear kind of road, everybody stays in their lane, if you will. Not that you don't cross-pollinate sometimes, but everybody pretty much knows this is what the CEO does, this is their reporting structure, this is what the CFO does, this is their reporting structure, and general counsel as well. I think what we found, so I think that is, when I think we have a lot of that already, I do agree, though, on the access piece. I mean, one thing I've learned is you need to set up a mechanism so the general counsel and the CFO would have access to board members without fear of, I don't even want to say retribution, but that's really the word. So we have to set up a mechanism so they can come freely, not telling people, but come freely to the board, or even a board member, without feeling like, oh my God, if the
violating
CEO
some-
finds out, I'm going to get fired.
Right.
Because there are going to be circumstances, it's everything's all hunky dory on wedding day. It's when you're in mediation because you're setting to divorce that things become mucky, and I think that the clarity is important, but to set the trio up for success, you have to give them each equal access to the board in a mechanism, in some mechanism. I
And
think
within their swim.
within their lanes, right? And so I think you have to do that. I think we found over the last year or so that we didn't have that. We didn't have an in-house counsel, so we didn't really have that, but I think the in-house counsel needs to have full access to the board if he sees something going astray and doesn't feel like it'll get a fair shake if he tries to run it through the CEO for whatever reason, Same with the CFO. And so if we're just talking about those kind of qualities, I think we've pretty much nailed what's important to us, right? Clarity, access, transparency, whatever that means, and what was the other one?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, transparency.
We talked about
role
communication and
clarity.
access.
Yeah.
I think access, I think setting up that structure, which is what we're trying to do here,
It's-
is a critical piece.
And if you do all those things, you'll create a trusting
Yeah.
relationship because people
And I
understand.
think when we hired the general counsel, we specifically said as a board, we wanted that position to report both to the CEO and to the board.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't currently have that set up
Right.
with the CFO. I'm not sure that has to be that formal, but, because when I think about managing the ship, I expect that the CEO is the captain of the ship,
Right.
and the CFO helps make sure that you're on track, but you also want them to feel they have access to the board.
So all good, role clarity, I'm pretty clear what the general counsel does, as well as the CFO does,
Yeah.
as well as the CEO.
Yeah.
Again, I'll go back to my points. We are setting this up, a structure, we are putting a structure in place for the exceptional things, not for day-to-day. Nobody is going to pick up the phone and call me, what do I do with this contract, right? It's all for the exception. And so transparency works until it doesn't work.
Right.
And that's what we are setting up a mechanism. And the more regularized the mechanism is, it is very smooth. So, which is what I meant by, that's where SEC, did this for public companies. You set it up such that on a quarterly basis, you have a meeting. It's a 5-minute thing, and that's it, it's done. But if there is a problem, that's when it comes out, and that's when the board can. So I'll go a little bit more, my thoughts on how this can get implemented, what are the different things that I would think about, right, from my perspective. But yeah, we are doing this primarily for the exceptional circumstances, and we do have that to be in place on a somewhat formal basis. And I think if we had had that, I'll throw this one more thing. If we had had that in the last 3 years, I think we would have had some, just like the whistleblower policy. By the way, whistleblower is for anonymous reporting, whereas this is to give the executive officers such as the general counsel and the CFO access to the board in the event that they need to
An
go to the board
expectation that they
directly
have.
without going through the whistleblower
Right.
mechanism. That's all, and I really think that in the last 3 years, the board would have heard from 1 or 2 people had we had this structure in place. I really think so.
So, the qualities that I would look for are 4 main ones. I'm going to talk about the duo of effectiveness, which means that we're able to do that which we must do, and efficiency, which means that we do it with the least amount of resources, time, personnel, and so forth. So we need structures that are effective and efficient, because we have so many burdens, so many challenges in RA. We're so big and so complex, we need to be effective and efficient. Secondly, the appropriate balance of powers has already been mentioned. The other thing that I think we need, let me go back and express a different viewpoint from my friend Sridhar. I don't think we are, in this document, defining merely or primarily the exceptional. I think we are expressing the day-to-day.
The norm. This
The-
is what-
the norm.
This is the way it should be.
But it should be framed in a way to deal with the exceptional. But I think it has to, this is meant to define the normal.
Yeah.
But it needs to leave room to discuss that which is not normal, to deal with that. And the final thing I would say, and for me the most important thing, and I come from a different background than everyone at the table. I come from a local government background, and I realize that this is not a local government, but this is not simply your mom and your mom's normal HOA. And so it is a duck-billed platypus of organizations, which has some characteristics of a local government and some characteristics of a corporation, a special kind of corporation that is a common interest community corporation. And so I come from a tradition that really sees the need for a strong CEO. I worked in the county manager or city manager board form of government for 25 years. And I see great wisdom in that. Most of the municipalities in the United States are run that way. They're not mayor or council, they're not mayor or commission type governments. And the reason is, one person is responsible for the whole thing. And I'm very concerned, I've expressed it at the board table before, that we cannot hope to run Reston Association on volunteer effort. Neither the volunteer effort of us board members, nor the volunteer effort of committees. Can't do it. We have to have designated professional officers who are in charge of it and who keep it, who are a principle of unity. We can't manage, we board members.
That is not what we are
No,
contemplating here.
let me express, I'm talking about a concern I have. This is a value I have. I want a strong executive who can make sure things are done, because we will change. We will retire, we will be voted in, voted out, and so we need strong continuity. And I see that in the CEO. Now, this does not mean a dictatorial CEO. This does not mean a CEO who hides stuff from the board. It can't be a power play. And there are ways of dealing with that if that should arise. But so I think we need balance. We need a sweet spot. And I personally have to share with you that I fear that we would wander too far from having a CEO who can, on a day-to-day basis, keep the trains running, knit it all together, and keep it working well. So that is a fear that motivates me. So, any other comments, any questions for one another about what we mean about these values? And let me ask this. I, for one, since we have our acting CEO and we have our general counsel, do we want to see what they think about what values they see we should have?
No, I don't really care.
I didn't forewarn you guys.
I do agree on the single button. The push.
Well, I think, for me, and I think Andy probably used the word, it's all based on trust. I mean, the whole reason we're having this discussion, I believe, is the lack of trust over the past 2-3 years. So whomever you have in my seat, Sir Counselor's seat, CFO's seat, it's all about trust. And all the words, you can toss all the words you want at it, transparency, effectiveness, whatever. But if you don't have trust between not only the 3, C officers, or the 2 C officers in the council, as well as the board, nothing's really going to be effective.
Right. I agree with that.
So I think that is fundamental to it. And so that's where the breakdown was.
Yep.
I mean, there's no secret behind that in this community. So, how you do that, perhaps it's who you get in as the permanent CEO and CFO.
Yeah.
And but I think that's the most important word. Of all the words that have been tossed out on the table, that's the most important.
Thank you.
In my opinion.
Tony, do you want to say anything?
Well,
Make sure it's firmly grounded in legal opinion.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
Speaking generally, just, as I said in my interview, whether or not there's a policy for the general counsel as to whether or not he can access the board, he can access the board.
Yeah.
The board is the head of the corporation is the attorney's client. That is a relationship that, for the attorney, is already vested because of the bar. So even if, even if Larry, let's say Larry was embezzling millions of dollars.
That's
Sorry.
where the money went.
Larry, that's a rough,
And I find out about it?
hypothetical there, but-
I am
have to.
ethically obligated
You're
to
obligated,
inform my
yeah.
client. If I don't, then I'm not going to be a lawyer much longer. And furthermore, if you have a lawyer, general counsel, outside counsel, that's not willing to keep his client informed, you need a new lawyer.
Yep.
That goes into trust. I agree 100% you need trust. When you're dealing with your money, your management, and your legal affairs, you need to trust that person like you trust your doctor. Because the consequences can be just as dire.
Yep.
And at the same time, you don't want to set up a paper CEO that has to run everything by the board or feels he needs to run everything by the board, he or she. Because then, things are just going to break down. Somebody's got to be, not necessarily the general, but somebody's got to be the colonel on the field. And whereas the generals say, okay, we want you to take this hill, it's up to the colonel as to how he deploys his troops and things like that.
Good analogy.
Okay. Okay, let's
Get doing something, John. Let's get doing something.
Let's get
start
start filling this up,
Okay,
please. Yeah.
now, the next thing on here was the various organizational models. I don't know if folks have looked at it, whether you found it helpful to see how different organizations handle it. I propose that we not talk about it. I want to assume that folks have read it, but if there are any questions, we can deal with it, but I say, let's start filling out our matrix.
I'm
Julie?
okay with filling out the matrix. I would just like you to comment on why you felt the Columbia, Maryland model wasn't applicable.
So-
All I need is an
Yeah,
explanation.
so Columbia,
Because I'm the one that asked for you to.
exactly,
explore it.
and I thought it would be more helpful. And
Yeah,
thank
I did
you,
too.
Larry, thank you, Larry, for
Very
finding
different
it.
structure. It's
But
very
their
different.
structure is totally different.
Very
The board elects a chairperson and a vice chairperson,
Okay.
and then proceeds to elect a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, who are the actual executive officers.
they're
So they
actually-
are,
Well, what's
and
the chair?
and the chair
The president
presides
is the
over
CEO.
the board.
The
So-
president is the CEO.
So the president is the CEO.
Treasurer is the CFO.
That's how my
effectively.
company works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Very different
they make a rather strict distinction between the legislative branch, which is the board, which has a chair and a vice chair, and the Columbia Corporation, which has a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and as many assistant vice presidents.
It's just a corporate setup.
And
That's
they have
all
no
at the time.
staff, right?
Say that?
They're all
Well, the
staff.
staff is
But beyond those people,
They are designated as,
Assistant
some of them are
treasurers.
designated as
Yeah.
officers.
like, okay.
And an interesting thing is, the president and the secretary treasurer can also be a board member. So they can be staff as well as board.
but they need not be.
But they need not be, but they can be.
Right.
Which is an interesting
Yeah.
distinction from
Okay,
where
that's
we are.
Interesting.
So it's very corporate. It's very corporate.
Which is fine. I think it
Okay.
works. I come from that world.
Are there any other questions about the matrices that we handed out? I'll note that Ken Chadwick, and I've not taken the time to ask Anthony this, and I apologize for that, but Ken concluded that it's fine for the board to appoint the county, the general counsel, but we will have to change, in his view, the bylaws to make our new Resolution 5 consistent with that. Because the bylaws give those powers to the CEO.
Correct. A lower, okay, so hierarchy. Again, you're going to hear me say this 100 times. POA, the statute, and the Non-Stock Corporation Act, your deed, your bylaws, all your resolutions and rules. A lower priority entity cannot conflict with a higher. The bylaws can't conflict with the deed, resolutions can't conflict with the bylaws. So if you were to draft a resolution that was in conflict with the bylaws, it would be invalid and wouldn't govern.
Okay,
Thank you.
now, so,
Okay.
okay, shall we begin filling this little guy out here?
Good.
So,
Chris is a better typer
Okay,
than me. And
so-
uses laptops way more frequently than I do, so I graciously offered
Way to go, Chris.
his sort of assistant secretary services.
I just want to follow up what you just said, Anthony, that if we change the resolution, but it's in conflict with the bylaws, the resolution can't actually be enforced.
Yeah.
Just everybody knows that.
And so any change
Until those
You have to
that
change the bylaw first.
which would be a referendum activity.
The referendum, correct.
Just saying.
So this would require a bylaw change?
So this is,
Item number, or if you look at the RA resolution, possible relations,
Right.
and Ken's recommendation, proposed RA Resolution 5, says BOD with input from CEO, and he's correct. It requires a change to the bylaws for hiring, firing, and disciplinary, because those powers are specifically enumerated to the CEO. And so that document would have to be amended.
Okay.
Which is the
I
first.
th-
But I think, again, tonight, I think what we're saying is just what we
where do we want to go?
think this would work best. And then we can decide if there's, I think, administrative or implementation issues that make any of these points more trouble than, well, we could amend them to fit some of the things we just said. But I think tonight we shouldn't go in thinking about that.
Let me,
We're not
I
writing
think,
the
I think we
resolution.
may have confused discussion about the deed and the bylaws, because Article 12 says that the bylaws may be amended by a two-thirds vote of the Board of Directors. So I think the board has the capacity to do that without, it's the deed that we can't change.
Page 74.
that's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe
At least we
correct,
can do
John.
that, Yeah.
okay. All right.
All right.
You're correct, John.
Okay. So what, do you mind if we, let's start with the upper left corner?
Yep.
I think no one, by unanimous consent, can we agree with the obvious that the Board of Directors hires, fires, and disciplines the
Yep.
CEO?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so BOD.
Yep.
Okay. Now, so the,
Working row or column?
huh?
Are we working row or column?
I think we should go across the row.
Okay, we can do that. The salary is also,
BOD,
can we,
yeah.
by unanimous consent by the Board of Directors?
Directors.
Yep.
Day-to-day supervision, according to our present Resolution 5, it's the Board of Directors through the
To
President.
the president, yep.
Okay, so, so it's not that the President supervises on his or her own.
Yeah.
He or she does it in the name of the board, but is the point of contact with the board.
Point of contact, yep.
Annual work plan, the way we do it is
That would
Board
be
of Directors in conjunction,
BOD through P.
Board of Directors in conjunction with the CEO is how we've been doing it. Do we agree with that?
BOD through P.
Work plan? You're talking
Correct,
through-
yeah.
Okay. Then, so the next one would be the BOD with CEO.
In consultation with the
With
CEO,
ICW, yeah,
ICW.
or you can say, yeah, ICW CEO.
Okay?
Because we don't have enough acronyms.
Yeah.
I know, exactly.
We only need two. We only need
CEO.
two. Okay.
Performance.
Purchase approval,
We didn't get-
No, performance appraisal,
is done by the Board of Directors.
BOD. BOD.
Look at us just agreeing on everything.
Yeah.
We'll get to the next
Oh,
two.
we'll have our arm wrestling.
I just want to make a point where you have agreed on now 5 things.
So,
I would say purchase approval is basically follow Resolution 7.
well, it's the approved budget.
Yeah.
And
No, the
purchasing.
purchase approval is more, it's really Resolution 7,
Well,
the purchasing policy, that's it.
Oh, that's true.
But the overall budget the overall financial policy for the year or biennium is the board-approved budget.
Is it,
Yes, but right now that
you
says
want purchase
purchase
or do you
approval.
want
So if you
budget?
want to add another column, it
Budget is
says
different.
budget,
Yeah, I don't think it should say purchase approval.
I don't
Then it
know.
shouldn't say purchase
There's a
approval.
resolution for that.
Okay.
Right.
But
and I agree
actually,
with you guys.
purchase
That's
authority
seven.
is an important thing because that is a clear spending authority. That's the one that sets the limits. I think having that column is important.
Which
I
one?
do too,
And I
but,
think following Resolution 7 is, we already have a policy for that.
right, but it was a board policy made clear by Resolution 7.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Whatever we want to call it, but that's what it is.
And then
yeah.
I think there needs to be another column that speaks to the budget.
The only thing is, here's the perspective for putting them together. When the CEO authorizes a purchase, he or she does so with, it seems to me, two sets of guidelines. One is the purchasing Resolution 7,
Right.
but the other is within the bounds of the board-approved budget. So
Yes,
purchasing is also bounded by that.
yes.
So, which is why I would say, I mean, we could have many columns.
Yeah, this is supposed to be the easy row, right? So, can we just put,
Spending authorities, I think, is a very important thing, but yeah. Budget, we don't have the way it is set up today, we don't have a check against the actual budget. It's more process. Like, nobody is going to,
Well, that's true. The CEO doesn't create the budget. The board creates the budget. The CEO brings forth to us a budget,
Proposes the budget.
Yeah, and
proposes
then
the
the board-
budget,
yeah.
and we approve the budget.
Don't we look at budget versus actuals every
We
month?
do that.
So there is a check in the
yeah,
sense that if
yeah.
Larry even did his purchase approval of whatever thousands of dollars he can, but all of a sudden the budget only showed $6 there for the year, I guess there'd be some splaining to do.
It would be. Or if I.
That goes along with that
as Tony said,
embezzlement
I
thing.
Took millions out, that'd be a problem.
Well, there'd be lots
That's
in
right.
there. But I just mean, even with, so the purchase authority resolution gives you authority to sign something up to whatever thousand of
Whatever it
dollars
was,
it is.
right.
If the budget only had $10 in the budget for that year and you spent the thousands of dollars, obviously at the next board meeting, we would do budget versus actuals, and there would
Yeah,
be,
or
there's the check and balance
Yeah,
there, I
Right.
believe,
Committee is
yeah.
a monthly check as well.
Yeah.
So
and the
the one,
CFO.
I think where maybe your question is going towards is, the purchasing resolution does not judge whether something is part of the budget or whether it is a good purchase. It just looks at the process behind it, whether everything was followed. But if you want a different check in terms of, you were supposed to spend $1 million on the spoon, right? Did you actually spend that, or you took that money and spent it on something else, something frivolous, through parties, right? And that comes from a different, is that your concern? Is
No,
that-
so in order not for,
We don't have a check for that.
So-
That goes really to the BVS, and you really, right now, we look at it at a high level as a board, not on a very detailed basis, so you can still hide things within departmental, which is where the trust comes, that somebody.
so what do we need this
so
header to say?
here's what's it,
Purchase approval is good, but go ahead.
yeah. And I would put the budget also, the board-approved budget. And the reason is, the two together, and Andy's already said it, you have to have both in place in order to be able to have the authority to make a purchase. What we're talking about is what gives the CEO the authority to make a purchase?
Right.
A board-approved
Yes, budget
budget and the
the
purchasing
resolution.
resolution.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think that's right, both of those
Yeah.
coupled together.
So then we need a new column.
Well, or we can.
No, you're just suggesting
The example
adding,
that's in the board packet actually has that.
Yeah.
DOD approved budget and
Yeah.
purchasing resolution, so it
But-
speaks directly to that.
But that's my gin up,
Okay,
okay?
so what do you want to
I
say
think
there?
that's,
like it.
but in my opinion, it works.
Me too.
But those are the two main checks
yes,
and
yeah.
balances.
DOD approved budget and purchasing resolutions, right there.
Well, but the
John's
fact that
sample.
John Mooney
That's
wrote
the
it
John
doesn't make
Mooney
it true.
sample.
But it's exactly what we
There was
came
some
to.
thought given to that, I suspect.
It's what we came to in this discussion.
That's good.
It's-
So
just-
good work.
just
So what do you want-
Give you this as a cheat sheet. This is not what you should right there until the board is.
Oh, that's like set.
But let's you and me, let's you and me.
Here's
look.
all the answers. Go ahead and type them in, Chris. I'm kidding.
So I
That's what I
understand
was
what you're
thinking.
saying, but
Can't we just?
No, I
stop
agree
it?
with that. I agree with that.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
disagreeing at all.
So
I'm
here's-
just saying that right now, we don't have a process in place for, the Resolution 7 addresses only the process, not whether
Exactly.
it's a valid spending or not.
exactly.
Right.
That's different, and it's good to put that in there. I have no problem.
Approval
Okay.
of purchasing.
Now,
Okay.
our current resolution says that small work assignments or inquiries can, obviously, the CEO makes, it should say it's the board or the director, individual director, can make small inquiries or small work assignments to the board. It could say, I could call Larry and say, Larry, will you go find what Columbia, Maryland does? And Larry did it. And I had the authority to do that because it's a small thing. But it's not explicit in the current 5. It sounds like we have to go through the CEO. And I think and this goes back to
You're talking about to the CEO or to other officers?
the CEO. The current Resolution 5 says work requests have to come,
Through the president?
yeah, through the president. And I think in every organization I know that works well, and this goes to the trust that everyone's talked about, you have to have some free flow. You have to have a CEO who's comfortable and trusts individual board members to be able to ask make small inquiries, do small work assignments, like I gave to Larry in preparing for this,
Right.
and that's not a problem, I don't think.
How about with president as opposed to in consultation? So that the president is at least aware of what's going on, of a request being made.
Do you think that's needed for small work assignments?
I don't know. Okay.
Certainly for big ones.
In my mind, something like that.
Yeah, I
I
guess
think for
not.
the most part, what I've tried to do is when I ask for a small work assignment, I would copy
That's all
the
I'm saying,
president
yeah.
to say, by the way, so that you're aware the request is
That's all
coming
I'm
in.
saying, yeah.
I think the
I
word,
said
I think,
President or director for that.
That's all I was saying, yes.
Sherry wants to say something here.
Sherry.
I think the word small is nebulous, because what we may think is a small ask
Yeah.
ends up being a huge ask, because we don't have the systems to provide the X, Y, or Z that we might. And I'm guilty of this. I think it's IT magic. Why can't you just make that report for me? Well, because we have to go through all these, because we're not set up to provide what you're asking for. And a small project becomes a big project, but sometimes the staff doesn't want to come back to the board and say, I really can't do that, or I can, but it's going to throw all this other stuff off my plate.
But that's
So
where they
it's-
should feel like they can. And
I know, I just don't, I'm not sure they
manage
Role of the
that.
In this, I see the role of the CEO is to make that judgment when John asks me, says, hey, can you get stuff from Columbia or Highlands Ranch or whatever? You know,
It's going
I
to
say,
take you
okay,
this long.
I
The
do
on-
that.
the only-
So if you say, I want information from 30 associations, to
Right.
put in the packet before, the next 3 days, I would say,
Can't.
John, that might be a little much, and so that's a larger task.
I will say, though, that last year when I was the president, and there was a lot of, and I saw how, Kate would get requests from, could have been 9 directors or 8 directors, and maybe none of the other directors knew that other directors were asking of different things. And if you're going to have a president that also has the capability of having a full-time job, everything can't rely on the president. You can't, courtesy copies maybe,
Right.
but you
Copies, I think.
you can't rely, because it'll get stuck. I mean, it would have, if, in my role, I wouldn't have been like, I have no idea. But I do think that we have to somehow figure out a way, and it can be the CEO, but the CEO is trying to please the board. The CEO needs to say, I can't, or not now, or maybe never, or you're overstepping your bounds, or whatever. And I think it does that. It is that trusting relationship that if you say, I can't do that, it doesn't mean you're failing at your job. It just means you're being honest.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of directors like to ask questions and maybe little pet projects. It might not even be like a sanctioned RA thing.
Right.
I know whenever I would ask the tennis program when I was starting to learn tennis, I would say, I'm not asking this as a board member. Can you help me with X as a member? Not a board member. I don't want special treatment. And if the answer is no, it's no, and that's fine. But I think we have to be real careful. And I don't know how you legislate that, but
I think courtesy copy is good, but Anthony had his hand up, if you don't mind, Andy. Go ahead, Anthony.
2 points. One, when I was in private practice, we always had our board designate a mouthpiece,
Contact.
someone that could relay it. That way, it cuts down on A, duplication of effort, and B, personal little agendas that might not necessarily
Which is-
be
yeah.
the idea of the board.
Yep.
The other point I wanted to make is, I don't see here where some of your committees are most importantly DRB, since it is pretty much its own sovereign
entity.
entity. I don't see where that is taken into account. You know,
We haven't
does
gotten there
DRB
yet.
need to task staff through the board? I certainly would think that they would say no.
So we
So
should have
that-
another
that's beyond-
row
the
that
reason
says
it's not there-
DRB.
The only committee that's mentioned is the Fiscal Committee, and that's because that's directly related to the CFO's responsibilities.
But-
And the reason it isn't, Tony, is because this is solely about Resolution 5, which deals with the relationship of the board to staff, not the committees.
But DRB is more than a committee. It's almost as if it needs its own separate line.
Well, but it's
as-
not in
It's not in Resolution
5.
5, I get that. But it might be something we need to consider
so.
as
so
a
are you saying that everything should go through a single, like the president through a single before it gets to the next person?
I would think that might be the best way to do it. I mean, certainly little things, you know.
That's what we're trying to define.
Staff is not going to like turn down, but if I'm, you know, let's say something, I hate to bring it up and I'm sorry, but like the lake house were to come up.
Yeah.
And I'm getting, you know, Julie wants a memo on, did the board have authority to do so? And you want a memo on, what is the best practices for such a purchase like this? And John wants me to look into whether or not the realtor has ever had anything, any disciplinary brought up against him. You know, and everyone has their immediate timetable.
Right.
So that's not necessarily maybe the board giving direction, but each director having their own little pet
That's-
project.
Yeah.
And that's what those happen.
Why
And that's
we
not a
would do a
small ta- Those
courtesy.
are not
Okay,
small tasks.
Andy.
Copy
Andy.
and courtesy to
I want to
the
go back to
city.
Sherry, and I'm okay with small and major, or large, small and large, small and major being nebulous, because this is about the board and the CEO, right? This is what that cell
line
is.
yeah.
And I'm perfectly fine with my CEO telling me, that, Andy, is not small, that's
Right.
big. And
yeah.
I'll tell you why it's big. So it has to go to another cell, which we haven't defined yet. Or having my CEO tell me, you know what? I have 8 small things right now, which make it what? Major, big. So I can't do. And that's part of that whole trusting relationship that I'm like, yeah, I got it, Larry. You got all of us actually things. This is more of a major thing. If it's Lake House, then even if it's a bunch of small little things, it's a major thing. So it doesn't even belong in that cell. And I'd like the relationship to be trusting and open enough where if Larry said, Andy, cool, yeah, I can get the Columbia thing, no big. Or no, Karen asked for Houston, Julie asked for, you know, St. Paul, Andy, you're asking for this. This has turned into a major thing. We now have to go to this next cell, which we'll probably say through the president or whatever.
Yeah, I'd say copy
So-
president, and that way you know, there's an inbuilt, you know, the check and balance.
I wouldn't bug the president with small things.
Just
No, I wouldn't
copy.
either.
I would not do that. I think absolutely, well, we'll get to that when we get to major tasks, but I think we would drive the president nuts.
No, the president doesn't even weigh in. It's just copied. And at that point, you know, the
Why?
CEO. at
Providing
least-
an awareness,
Yeah,
because he may, between the president and the CEO, it may be the only point where you see that these 7 suddenly
Yes.
become
yeah,
a big.
yeah.
And the
But
president can
I-
also
No,
then
the
say,
CEO
well,
tells me
Director
that. The
so-and-so
CEO tells
has
me it's
asked
big.
for the same thing
I
already.
mean, I'm
so-
trusting the CEO to tell me
Okay.
that.
Yeah, and a good example, you know, taking it down one notch in the overall hierarchy is of the 250 emails that I'm currently getting per day, I would say that about 50 of those are, I want to make sure he knows about it. I don't have to react.
Right.
I don't have to pick up the phone. I don't
Right.
even have to reply, but I need to be aware of it because it's something that's happening within the
Awareness.
association. And so it's a similar
Courtesy
awareness.
Right.
piece.
And I would expect that your staff member like, I'll use an example right now. I've had an inquiry from a member who'd like to know all the dredging costs.
Yeah.
Right? And we have a certain amount of that data available to us in our current records, and we provided that. I simply sent an email and said, hey, can you get this information back to the member? And we were able to give a certain level. But then it was, well, I want from day one. Well, day one of Reston Association and dredging lakes, that's not readily available. So it's going to take some time. So, so that's a different kind of a question.
But I mean, I think we then it turns into a major assignment, but that's a different cell we haven't talked about
Okay,
yet.
is there consensus? Can people live with what I hear strong sentiment for, at least on the part of several, is that small work assignments would come either from the board or from a director with a copy to the president?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
They can throw them away in their circular file if
Works
they
for
like.
me.
what?
She's got cookies.
Cookies, a cookie monster has struck. Okay, okay, so, Chris, that would read BOD or D with copy
To P.
to P. Okay? Okay, what about major work assignments?
Write us out with a rail.
I think major work assignments can only be given by the board.
Yes, I agree.
Board.
Yes. And an example of that to me in the past couple of years was a director asking the CEO to work on an analysis of whether or not the way assessments
Yeah.
were driven and whether
board
that
resolution,
was a
effectively.
change to, and to me, that was, the board never asked for that study to be done. And that was a major
Yep.
task.
I would qualify, anything that's major is probably a resolution that we do at a board meeting, so.
It's a motion,
effectively,
an
yeah,
action
it's a
that we
motion,
take
an action that we
as a
would have.
part of a
And I will
discussion
tell
that
you
we're
that
on.
Fairfax, David helped me quite a bit working this out. And David and I both compared notes, and both Fairfax County and Arlington County have an actual time standard. So a work is a major project if it demands so much staff time.
Yeah,
So we could do that at some time, we're not going to do it
don't
now.
have to do
All
it.
right.
Okay.
Next.
What about, so CFO, so,
The meal part first.
So,
Okay,
I-
CFO.
yeah.
Don't put those near me.
I propose that it be the CEO in consultation with the board, rather than hired by the board. And that's because of the intimate relationship between managing and finances.
Yes.
I have a question for Anthony. How do you, I know we'll get to that in general counsel, because from my perspective, I'd like to set up both the relationships in exactly the same way, hire, fire, discipline, right? So under POA or all the other, things you talked about earlier, would that work for the general counsel? Because I'd like to set it up. My recommendation would be to set up both the general counsel as well as the CFO in exactly the same way. So CEO in consultation with the board. Will that work for general counsel?
No.
Just
General
the board.
counsel is
It's just a letter.
BOD.
Only
The
In
CEO is
consultation
signing
with
it.
the CEO,
with the C,
which is,
yeah,
Part of the
opposite.
board.
So then I would do the same for the CFO.
which is exactly how Fairfax County and Arlington do it. They
Then I
do
would
not
the
hire
same
the
way.
CFO, but they hire
Hire
the
the council.
council
Yes.
in consultation. In fact, they consult with the CEO, but
I like both the ways
So
that
then-
you've described, that John's described that.
And
Good.
I don't know what the ethical implications are for someone with like Robert's credentials. I would assume they're similar to mine. So by making it the other way, where hiring, firing is solely at the, so basically the way this, I read this right now, a CEO in consultation with the board, CEO can come and say, hey, I'm thinking of firing Robert.
Yeah.
And the board goes, oh, no, terrible idea. He goes, okay, well, I'm firing Robert.
Yeah,
And that could come about because Robert sees something in the finances,
Yeah.
talks to CEO, and then just decides, you know what, my ethical obligations demand I
Yes,
go to
yes,
the
yes.
But we have the whistleblower policy now.
No,
But
but, whistleblower is for anonymous reporting, but it's more about, one is, reaching out. That's one of the reasons why we have this parallel, or at least on a quarterly basis,
Right.
access to the board
Right.
for that person to communicate. Howard, the reason why this comes down to implementation, right? Why would a CFO not report something to the board? Because the CEO can still turn around and fire the CFO, right? Because the CEO, if you give CEO the power to do that regardless, right, then it effectively defeats this whole, setting up of this lines of access.
So
to
can we
the
say board in
right?
consultation with the CEO? Board has trump card? I mean,
Yeah.
board first?
And
But the CEO ought to have something to say about who this,
I know, but can I, John, I want to add two things, so that will complete your picture, okay? And I want to say that to you so that you have from your perspective, how can the CEO control the CFO, right? How does it work? The work plan will be set by the CEO in consultation with the board with respect to certain areas, that's it, okay? Performance appraisal, we can do 70%. Effectively, that's how it's done. 70 to 75% will be from the CEO. That's how you have the CEO having substantial control. I know from the articles that you selected and circulated, I feel that, you're not, but you have to have the ability for the board to have some say in the CFO not getting fired just because she or he, is going to report something, right?
Well-
And so the performance appraisal and the work plan, I think, addresses the CEO's control. But I wanted you to have that picture now. Please
Yeah.
go ahead and comment.
So,
I'm still thinking, can I
Go
talk
ahead.
while I'm thinking?
Yes, yes.
Go.
Can you, Andy?
Sure.
So I'm thinking the other way.
can he chew gum too?
Yeah, and walk. So let's think about the other way too. So as a board, we're seeing monthly reports that we're
Right.
not happy with. So we're thinking the CFO is struggling. For some reason, the CFO is struggling because we're getting reports that are not correct. The dashboard we've asked for updates to the dashboard, we're not getting it, whatever the case may be. And so how do we play that out? If it's the CEO has hire fire discipline, the board tells the CEO something's got to change.
Yeah.
CFO is not up to snuff. And I guess then if the CEO says, no, that's my pick, I'm going to stick with him. I guess the next set is, well, then you're gone.
Right.
that's how
And
it's
that's
done.
how,
Yeah.
one way
That's how
that
it's
will
done.
work from that direction. Now we've got this other direction you're talking about saying the CFO is dead on, and we're worried about the CEO's ability to do some things, and is the CFO, correct and maybe nervous to come to the board or whatever because the CEO might not have, the same view. And so I'm trying to get both of those through my head about how this would work, and that's kind of why I'm thinking out loud. Thank you.
Yes, Julie. Yep.
So I'm thinking in terms of that word trust. And I believe that the CEO needs to have a good working relationship with his or her CFO. And that's why I would be more comfortable if that column of hire fire for the CFO was the CEO in consultation with the board. Because for the CEO to have a well-functioning machine, I think that there needs to be an element of, back to Tony's thing of, who's the colonel on the hill, right? How we given the direction and plan, strategic plan, how is it going to be executed? Now, we're getting those quarterly reports or whatever, so we're getting some data in. We've got a fiscal committee, treasurer, whatever, who's also going to give us some feedback to that. So I think there's enough checks and balances that I'm I'm more comfortable that I would like my CEO to have a substantial stake in the CFO. And I, as a board, should expect that my CEO has that higher fire. That's just where I come down on it.
So, I agree with you. And I keep coming back to Reston Association cannot run on volunteer power. We happen to have a board of directors now with some extraordinary financial capacity. I mean, Eric and Sridhar, you have some, I have a lot of budget stuff, Sherry is small, in her own business. You can't count on that. The board members will be whomever the members elect. And you have to have someone who has at least the general financial budgetary competence to make a decision on a day-to-day basis whether the CFO is doing his or her work. That's one thing. Secondly, what would happen if the CFO felt compelled to reveal, misdeeds? The CFO could do that directly to the board under our whistleblower.
Right.
We don't need a special provision here for that. But secondly, if the CFO disagreed and the board liked what the CFO was doing and didn't like what the CEO, and then the CEO said, I'm going to fire the CFO, the board could immediately say, you do that and you will be fired. And we will rescind the termination of the CFO. I think there are checks and balances, but what I'm concerned about is good, solid continuity in our financial management. And I don't see that. I don't see we cannot count on the board doing that. What we should count on is the board hiring a CEO who has at least general competence to make sure the CFO is.
But why do you think the board has the competence to hire a general counsel? It's not a question of competency. I'm scratching my head as to where the competency, financial competency, comes in. The only point here is, the CEO should not fire the CFO just because the person is doing something. And I don't
Finish that
understand.
sentence.
Just because the person is reporting something to the board, right? And I think that's the thing that we are trying to, because if that fear is there, then there might be a problem. Anthony,
You
yeah,
have a tetra.
you'll have a tetra problem.
Going
But
with your,
we've
with
taken
your
steps
scenario,
to-
I'd ask where your authority is to do what you outlined.
What do you mean?
If CEO fires CFO, you say, don't do it or you're gone. First off, the CEO is going to be under a contract. Okay, so it'll have to be consistent with the terms, and the contract will have to be very carefully drafted. And then if your own resolution says CEO makes hiring, firing decisions of the CFO, the board can't countermand it because you're bound by your governing instruments.
No, they can say, we don't like your performance in this matter. Absolutely can say that. City managers have been fired all over the place for firing police chiefs, fire department chiefs, and so forth. Happens all the time.
I understand what you're saying, John, but my question is, how is the governance resolution going to account for the fact that you've basically stripped the board of hiring and firing as it pertains to this position?
Mhm. That's my proposal.
You'd need I guess you'd have to appoint an acting CEO with instructions to bring the person back, just thinking out loud. But I'm just bringing up concerns that I have from a legal perspective of where is the authority drawn from to go through that scenario?
Well, help me then. We've got a CFO, our cell here is CFO and hire fire discipline. And it seems like we're debating, is that CEO in there? Or is that BOD in there? Or is it some combination of the two in there?
What was
I think that's
proposed,
what we're deciding, right? Are there other things?
I think there's two variations we're talking about. Is it CEO in consultation with BOD, or is it
The other way
BOD in consultation with CEO?
And what I'm hearing is that
I think when we select, as a board, we select that CEO, I think one of the strengths, knowledge pieces that CEO, in my mind, should have is strong financial CFO, background. They don't have to necessarily have been a CFO, but given what we're asking of our CEO, I think that's a core strength, and that's incumbent on us to do the proper hiring of the CEO, so the CEO can do the proper hire and managing of their CFO. We've already talked about giving access and creating an environment where the CFO council would feel free to come to a board and talk about concerns. I just don't know why I would be wanting to second guess my CEO's hire fire.
Two things. So as Tony mentioned, contractually, the CEO is the only employee on a contract.
Of the board, right, yeah.
So there can be a specific term in that contract with respect to the CFO that you shall consult with the board
It's true.
for the hire of any CFO, whether it's,
Right.
a brand-new CEO that's going to have a new CFO or down the line.
So that
And
could be
I-
a contract term.
I think so. I don't see why it couldn't be.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
You could do, and that's, we're going to have to look at the language carefully. You could put that in there, but again, when I hear consult with, I hear, hey, board, I'm thinking about doing this. Board says,
So would you
terrible idea.
rather have it say with approval of?
Ratification by.
CEO with a BOD approval?
It might be with BOD approval, that might be
That might-
sufficient in terms of hiring, firing,
Yeah.
determination. But I guess.
Which is the same thing, so which is what I'm looking for too, as long as the CEO cannot, again, we are all dealing.
Unilaterally fire.
We set something up for,
Yeah, that
that
makes
would
sense
work
to
in the
have a-
normal, but really, we'll use it only during exceptional circumstances.
So could we fill that little sucker
I would love
by
to,
saying CEO
with
in,
the,
in
with the
in
With board
contractu-
approval.
in contractually enforceable
Let's just say with
consultation with the.
approval.
How about with approval of the
With
board?
BOD
With board
approval.
approval, CEO with board
BOD
I
approval.
think it's part of your
Pretty straight.
resolution, because your resolution, if your CEO acts outside of the resolution, it's invalid, just as if it was in the contract. So I like lots and lots of documents.
Yeah.
Lawyer,
Okay.
and so I would.
CEO with board
Has-
approval.
has
Paid by
Chris-
the page,
Has
but you
Chris
work for us
captured
now.
it?
Yes.
CEO with
That's
BOD
good.
approval?
That's all I want.
Good.
That's good.
Okay.
And the other example, the second point I want to make is that I go back to because I think it's telling, is the process we used bringing this young gentleman on to
Yeah.
my left.
Yeah.
Where that was and again, that kind of comes back to, I think, sort of a trust thing.
Right.
We all sat down around a table, we hashed it out, we vetted the candidates, and
You had senior leadership people
Right.
have some
That's-
input
that's
into
kinda-
it.
we put them through the ringer.
Yeah.
well, and I think that's the process that I get the sense that you're
Yeah.
you're envisioning,
Yep.
for the future,
Yeah.
CFO and not so much the CEO, but
Yeah.
I sure hope that
Yeah.
department heads get to meet and interview the person,
Yes,
but
yes, yes,
that's just
yes,
my
yeah.
personal thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But anyway, so I want to bring those 2 points up, because I think there's other ways to address
So we could
that.
fill
It all
in
gets
that
back
extra.
to the same point.
Could we add there, so we don't forget this, and you may have to make the typeface smaller, Chris, but CEO with BOD approval insured per CEO contract.
Employment contract.
Yeah.
See, one of the things I actually wanted was also, which we've not discussed recently, is the CEO, CFO, and the general counsel all have contracts. That's
We do in my
another way to
company,
put
the
it.
C-suite
Yeah, we all-
people
I
have
mean,
contracts.
That's the way,
That
Do we have to
is
decide
not
that
true in
tonight?
local government.
we don't have
We
to
don't have to
decide
do
today,
that.
but
Let's
something
not
to
do
think
that
about.
tonight.
That's fine.
Can we just jump right down below that to the general counsel and go ahead and put BOD?
Same thing, yeah.
With CEO approval?
No,
I don't-
there's-
CEO
With
doesn't-
CEO,
I think
in
the same will work
consultation
for
with
that too.
CEO?
I don't think the
Right?
CEO has
CEO with
approval.
BOD approval should work for general counsel.
Well, but they
I think
work
it's just
in
the BOD.
BOD with,
Again, I come back to
In
who's my client.
consultation with.
We're your client.
The client is the board, and so that's who, and the CEO is a member of the board, so I see no problem with being BOD
BOD?
with approval of CEO.
Or in consultation.
CEO's not, is the CEO a member of the board? It's an officer, but not a
Non-voting
member of the
member.
You don't
board.
vote.
Non-voting.
So why can't we say BOD in consultation with
CEO.
CEO?
Certainly could.
Yeah, okay.
Even
Okay.
though Julie's taken us column instead.
I
of
know,
row.
I just thought that would
That's
be
fine.
an easy.
That's
And
okay.
Before we
That's
leave,
okay. I think
before we
it's fine.
leave
It's
the
the
cell
same
that
thing.
we were on previously, I would like to ask our
We're already at
acting-
7:30, so
I'd like
let's
to
go.
ask our acting CEO your thoughts on CFO position. Are you happy with, hey, you go out there, hire yourself a CFO, Larry, and are you happy with, okay, I'm going to go do the whole hiring process with Melissa, and I'm going to
Bring it to
bring a
the
set
board.
of candidates in front of the board with my recommendation, or would you rather say, hey,
Here's
this
who-
is my
here's my
job,
choice.
I'm going to go hire a CFO?
This is my
and do
choice.
it.
It's
And I mean, I'm
approve
putting you
it.
on the spot, but
Yeah.
you're the CEO,
No, yeah,
acting
and I'll
CEO
tell you-
here.
and I'll tell you
I've seen
exactly
it in
what I
both
think.
ways. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
I would say that I think I and the people, the staff that we have here are capable of hiring a good CFO as long as we got the specific direction of the talents. So in other words, the board says, yeah, here's the job description, but here are the most important things that we want out of this new CFO. So I feel confident that I and my coworkers could do that. That's not the direction I get the sense this board is going. So the process that I would envision would be not unlike when we hired Tony, is we would vet, 2, 3, 4 candidates, and we'd throw them in front of the board officers or something like that, or
Board officers,
For the final-
that would be a-
to the board and say, look, here's where we've got it down. We're comfortable.
That worked really
with
well.
I think that
one or
worked
two
pretty
days or
well,
something.
yeah.
But then the board is doing the hiring, which,
No.
No, it's
No,
just an
What I'm saying
approval.
is, here, just use an example. I got 3 candidates. I've interviewed them with the staff and so forth. We got 3 candidates, and we probably have a preference.
Right.
But I would let the board speak to them. Ultimately, in this case, I think it would be my decision. That's the way it currently is. But I would want the input, certainly, of
Wouldn't
the
you,
officers.
if you honestly felt out of the 3, one was your preferred,
I would
would you not just bring that person forth to the board and say, this is who, and this is why? Are you okay with it?
that
You
to
know?
me is when you're saying with board approval, you're
Yeah.
bringing a person that you have
recommendation.
selected, subject to board approval.
But it says the
rather-
board has to ratify it.
Yeah.
I think it's one meeting, I think it's fine
But
to meet with the
Are you
officers.
okay, when we start trying a draft on
Yeah.
this, if we add there, is everyone agreed? I liked
With the-
what Larry said, and that is that the board would have the power to exercise its ratification or approval rights by a clause in the CEO contract. Tony?
I don't want that in the resolution,
Yeah.
and here's why. It's a personnel matter.
Yeah.
And it could open up in the event of litigation, it could open up potentially discovery issues on there. That's the only concern I have. So it might merit getting Eddie's input
Okay.
on that particular clause.
Too far down in the
Yeah.
details.
Betty would probably just say CEO, let's see.
Well,
Anyway.
So
part
the
of
way-
that's
the way that box
part of that's an
stands-
implementation
So,
element that may not need to be in the
Yeah,
resolution.
no, I'm
We-
fine with it being in the contract.
Right,
It's not part of the resolution.
But not
I have a
part of the
question about
resolution.
Stating that in the resolution.
Yeah.
The only part of it.
So the way that box stands right now, it is the
CEO of the board
CEO
of
looking for the CFO with the help of their HR person. They come down to top couple of candidates, and before that offer letter goes out,
It's brought to
that
the board.
CEO has to bring that person in front of this board and say, do you approve me hiring this person?
which has to vote.
And we vote, and if it's 5 votes, then the answer is yes.
Right.
Is that how that box?
That's how it would
be-
work, yeah.
Is that what that box
That's
Is
the way
that
I
what
see it.
people want? I'm not fully
Is that what the box
comfortable. I'm not
says?
That's what the box
with it.
says.
Yeah.
Is that what we want?
I don't.
I'm not,
That's what it says.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's with the board.
So we would have an executive session, because it would be a personnel
Other
matter.
kinds of
And
contracts, why not this?
And if we felt a need to interview the person, or we could simply say we are comfortable, it could be a consent item, that we're comfortable with the proposed
I
candidate.
liked,
I
I
think
I
the
happen to like the
CEO should
model
hire
that we
the CEO.
used when we hired Tony, where, there was one meeting where we brought the finalists in, they had, the SLT was there, you had 4 board officers. We got to see, interestingly enough, how that individual acted with both staff and board members. Because first they interviewed with staff and they acted a certain way and the staff ranked them and we didn't know the rankings. Then the board interviewed them and we sort of had our our gut check, but then when we brought both of us in, so it was people you're working with and the people you're working for, you got some very different personalities that showed up of those candidates. And so I thought that was useful. I thought it was useful. So even if it was just a meeting with your top 2 or 3, with at least the officers, at least the treasurer,
Yeah,
because
I
the
think so.
treasurer is going to be, might be able to ask questions that none of us would know even to ask.
I would say
I don't think it's a
officers.
waste of an hour. I think it's a good hour, and
It's
I don't
1
know.
hour, it's not a problem, it should be the officers and
I don't think we were talking a time element. I think what
what.
Andy was speaking to was, is it a majority vote of the board? Is it
I think we should.
approval? Right. So what,
It should be a majority decision of the
Well,
board.
here's the problem. And I've been hired a number of times in cities, and I've hired a number of times. And if something like that happens, the person who is the preferred candidate wonders, who's in charge here? Am I setting myself to be in a crossfire here between warring factions? If the CEO is hiring me, but it has to be approved by the board, what is this? I fear scaring good candidates away because of muddy
I don't
lines.
think so. I have been
I'm with you,
hired as
John.
CFO of a nonprofit,
yeah,
of school system. It goes through the board, period.
I'm okay with
It
this,
is,
with
goes through
approval.
try hiring Fairfax County
did you
Public
feel
Schools.
you were
the
walking into a
CEO
warring
for that
factions when
on
you
the board.
sat with the SLT and the board members?
No, I felt like, I guess I took it to mean that like my day-to-day tasking is always going to be the CEO, and the CEO is my
exactly,
boss.
yes, yeah.
But my ultimate responsibility is to the corporation through the board.
Right.
So like, I didn't see it as a potential conflict. I really feel like after reading the documents and knowing the relationships, strong organization, the CEO and the board are going hand in hand. And it's only when things get
Exactly.
exceptionally screwed up
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
you have the CEO
It's
fighting
only
with
for the
board.
Well, there's a
exception.
huge difference asking Tony, because Tony's cell there talks about the BOD as the hiring
Right,
entity.
right.
And so we
Very-
have to obviously vote on that, because that
Right.
is us doing the hiring.
Yeah.
That's very different than the CEO trying to hire with us approving the CEOs. I mean, those are two
No, but if
different
it- if it-
things.
if
I'm not
it-
saying
No, no,
it's
I
bad to talk about it, but
And Tony
in his
has an
cell,
employment
it says
contract,
we are the
right?
hiring
You have a
entity.
contract.
Yes, but if we have BOD approval, without the board approving, how will you do
You
that?
don't have your own
And I'm,
employment contract?
you can,
Here, okay, should have us.
this works in nonprofits, this works in school systems. I don't know why we are struggling with this.
I'm not
The
sure.
board has to approve it. Pick up the phone and call Robert, who hired him. Ask Robert, he went to a nonprofit. He was hired by the board. That's the way it is set up. I don't know why we are it is one more agenda item
Well,
in a board meeting, maybe once in 3 years.
okay, so
It's-
let's
it's-
fill
it's not a
this
big
out,
deal.
because we have a task to get done. Let's keep going, because we're not going to vote on it tonight, in the sense that we're developing this matrix, right?
We are-
Bring forth to the board at a board meeting, at another,
I understand, but let me clarify. We are the board, as a board, we are taking the time to approve, advisory committee members. This is the CFO.
This is true.
We have like 100 advisory committee members that go through consent calendar and board approval, BOC process, then it goes to BOD. And we are talking about the second,
So let's keep
significant
moving.
operations officer in the company.
I mean, this
And
is-
we have so much reluctance to put that person through a board approval.
No, no,
I don't get it.
I think it's important we
I'm
just
saying
talk
leave it
about-
That's
that
what
way.
you
Let's
guys are
keep going.
talking about, that it shouldn't come to board for approval.
But that's not what everybody's talking about. I'm okay with that box.
me too. Let's keep
I
moving.
mean, why are we
got lots
questioning
of
that? I think Andy has a question, John has a question, Julie has a
Who's
question.
okay
on
with the
that.
box as it is? Raise your hand.
I'm asking the question, so I don't know yet. Let
Okay.
me ask the question.
Okay, ask
So
your
right
question.
now, it talks about, I thought, walked through the hire.
Yes.
That made some sense.
Yeah.
It also says at the top of that column, discipline and fire.
Yeah.
So let's help me through, just indulge me.
Yeah.
So now Larry's not super happy with the CFO that we approved with him 6
Mm-hmm.
months ago, and now he wants to discipline this person.
Hmm?
what does that mean? He disciplines them after he comes in and we have an executive session, say, I'm going to discipline them?
Yep.
Or I'm going to fire this person because they are doing egregious things, so we have an executive session and Larry tells us he's going to fire that person, and we then approve in open session that he's going to fire that person?
Personal matter.
It's a personnel matter, exactly.
So
It's
then we
a,
have to approve it, so we approve in executive session that Larry can fire this CFO.
Yes.
That's how,
We
I'm just
would-
trying to figure out how
we
it
would
would work.
approve.
that would be the
And we would
mechanics.
come out of the executive session, but what would be said was that we have given our CEO
Yeah, the
the
powers.
authority to proceed with the recommended actions, right?
Yep,
That's
that's
what
it.
we would be saying. We wouldn't be saying, and we support firing.
Yeah,
I have a question. The prior version in conjunction with the Board of
Consultation.
Directors, could you elaborate on exactly what you meant by
So,
that?
in the present bylaws and in the present Resolution 5, it's the CEO who hires all staff below him or her.
Okay. But you had wanted the addition of in conjunction with the board, or was that
was
just?
my suggestion.
That was you, and so what I was asking was, what is that scenario exactly in conjunction with?
It is exactly the way it happened with Tony. So I'm
for
sorry, that's the
Tony, we had
CFO.
a-
It's the inverse of that.
we had a-
It's the inverse of that.
Okay.
So just as with Tony, the board hired Tony after going through a process, a shared process with staff.
Okay,
So the inverse would be here, the board, the CEO would hire the CFO having gone through a similar process with board. So it's the inverse.
here all we are saying is, this will also be a motion in front of the board authorizing the CEO to hire XYZ as CFO. That's it. And it can, it's just like anything else. Every month we look at appointing so many people to advisory committees. And it's like,
I mean, these are important
why do they even
appointments.
come to the,
Yeah.
why do we even deal with, bother with advisory committees? Each of the names and put them on the consent calendar if you're not that worried about the senior most financial officer in the organization. Why would that person not get the board's approval? I don't get it. It's a fiduciary role. The person that is executing the fiduciary role on a day-to-day basis, why would we not want that?
If we stick with what's in the box right now and continue on the roll, let's see if it all works with that. Is that
So
okay?
my suggestion is for this moment, would you yellow that, indicating we might want to come back and discuss it more to see if we can find a
Above
consensus?
CFO, there you go.
When are we going to discuss it? Let me ask the question.
I mean,
How are
I
we
think
gonna
let's
discuss
just,
this?
let's just work our way through the row and see if it all works with the way we have that now. And if it does, we're you, me, John, and Ben are the committee. We have to write up the resolution anyway, so we'll have to fight about it at the committee meeting. The whatever. BGC, sorry.
Yeah,
Or ABB.
Okay,
yeah.
ICWP,
Now we have-
ICW.
now we-
so
added a
who would
whole-
set the salary of the CFO?
That would be
The board does do the budget,
Yeah.
don't we?
Well, CFO?
I don't know.
So
do we?
CFO, I don't think so.
Okay, so the board does through the budget. We did that, I just want to refresh for everybody's memory. The board approved Anna Aron's hire last year at $55,000 cost to company. Again, I just want to point out, we did that through the budget process and we set something aside. There is no reason not to follow that. If we want to say through the budget, CEO recommends, CEO sets the salary, but it's part of the budget approval. But I think the board is somehow going to be involved in that, whether we like it or not.
I would say CEO within board established budget.
That's good, that's fine, I'm fine with that.
Fine with that.
Sure. I'm fine with that.
board approved, I mean, doesn't
The
this,
intricacies of that in
That's fine.
reality are,
We don't have to
you
discuss
know,
it.
just whatever the skill set is of the
Yeah.
person, there's
Yeah.
a range within that's going to happen, but that range.
Within
so-
board
That's fine,
established
I'm good with
budget.
that. I'm good with that. And I think that's something that will
Which
come
was
up even as part of the
originally
motion.
presented by the CEO anyway.
Okay, next one.
For the board's approval.
Before we go back.
Day-to-day
Day-to-day
supervision,
supervision.
CEO.
And then that's just sharing.
CEO,
Sharon
CEO.
who?
CEO, annual work plan, CEO,
C,
in consultation with board.
board, CEO and
In consultation with board.
CW board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Performance appraisal, I would say CEO, my recommendation. 70% or 75% CEO, 25% board.
What, so who's going to pull the trigger, though?
Hmm?
Does the 70% pull the trigger?
It does have a majority say in that, but obviously with the board, to the level that the board will interact, board will have a say in that.
So could we
Yeah,
say
we need to look
CEO
on
in
ourselves,
consultation with board?
Yeah, that's fine. Can we have an actual percentage? You know, because you're giving, the way the performance management is going to be set up, you know, it's the CEO, it's the co-workers, a bunch of people will have
Right.
input into that process. And I just want to put the board also into that, at least the officers, both for the general counsel as well as
I,
CFO.
I completely support that the board should be consulted.
I'm good.
Purchase approval.
Okay?
Say you're good on that one.
Good.
Same as the previous, yeah,
Yeah, we're good. This side of the table's good with that one.
yeah.
I can't read it.
No.
No, not CEO with
The one,
BOD.
the cell
Same
above
as
it,
the
cell
previous,
above it.
BOD approved budget and purchasing resolution, same as that.
Yeah, probably that whole
You should,
column.
you should do that for the whole,
Yeah, that
yeah.
whole
Just
column.
copy and
Just
paste
copy
it for,
and paste.
yeah, that's it.
Every cell below it.
Yeah. Why don't you just copy that cell and put it in the three below, Chris? And if we don't like
You
them,
could
we'll-
put the word ditto.
Yeah,
I love that.
okay.
nobody uses that.
Except for general counsel, we're not.
Small work assignments. So I would suggest it's the CEO, the board of directors, and directors, so that I could, so that I, as an individual director, could call the CFO and say, you know, how much did we spend on pools last year?
Yeah.
Is that okay? But
Yeah,
do
that's
we
a
want,
simple query.
Yeah.
but with, I would say
We
with,
practiced all this last year.
so, I mean, we could say here we could say with copy to the CEO.
I was going to ask what the protocol is. Would the CEO be copied on those anyway as a
Yeah.
matter of?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Typically, yes, yeah.
So it could be CEO, comma, BOD, comma, D with copy to CEO. Does that work? To CEO. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Major work assignment.
And I think it's CEO and BOD, huh?
Yeah, ICW,
Yeah.
yeah. CEO, ICW,
And fiscal committee.
okay, all right.
Good point.
That's a good point,
Fiscal
yeah.
committee, I guess, too, can,
Yeah,
yeah, so, yeah, okay.
Road working group.
all right, same thing. I think we basically go through the
Road
same,
working group.
I would say, same as the CFO, effectively.
Well,
What? I can't read that. I'm just looking at it as if I can. I can't read that.
Okay, it's the same as what we have for the CFO, I would say.
CEO,
CEO, ICW, with BOD.
that would be CEO, Chris, that cell.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it should be the same as above, I think.
Annual work plan would be CEO with, in coordination with the
Yeah.
BOD.
Yeah,
What's this one? We
performance appraisal, same thing.
Okay.
I would suggest the same thing, CEO.
BOD in connection with CEO.
Yeah.
Nobody's gone to jail. He's doing well.
So that
Well, wait
would
a
be
minute, which way
just
does
the
that one
opposite,
go?
I think. Is it CEO with, yeah, it probably
CEO.
should be
Same,
that
same, same.
because the day-to-day supervision is by the CEO.
He or she would have the best
Yep.
firsthand
Yeah,
knowledge.
yeah, it's same thing,
And I suspect that the
just same
CEO
as above.
would hear from the board if the board's general counsel was going awry. get some idea about it.
Perish the thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, same, except for the fiscal committee.
Going
Well-
off the reservation
Going
again.
rogue.
So,
One.
Okay,
Can we add legal committee to that in case I want to give them something big?
and let me,
Mm-hmm.
this is an internal matter, Larry, but small work assignments,
So far, I have no role.
The names behind all those.
Where are we looking?
we don't have to talk about it here. I would say that the understanding that the CEO can delegate to certain key staff
right.
the ability to ask questions of general counsel too.
Yeah, oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but that need not be here because that doesn't deal with the board
Day to day.
relations.
This is really board to
That's a staff to
That,
staff.
that's you through your extension of staff.
What about Sherry's suggestion on the major work, including the legal committee?
Oh, I was kidding. We don't really give them any work.
No?
No, we have 10-minute meetings. They're pretty good.
Wow.
All right.
Signed up the wrong committee.
Well, when I ran them, they were 10 minutes.
Okay? Other staff, that's pretty easy. It's CEO all the way across there.
Huh?
CEO.
CEO/CFO, because they run two different, CEO, CFO.
Why should it be
Why
CFO?
CFO?
Not for everybody, but because many of these staffs report ultimately to the CEO, all right,
Oh.
but you do have the CFO, the finance staff, the IT staff. So
Oh, you
the-
mean
The
transfer
CFO
stuff.
does have a significant role.
But
and-
We have
ultimately,
purchase approval box 2 to go in, so.
At the end of the day, I got to
It's still the
hold
CEO.
one person in charge of,
Right.
are you making budget?
yeah,
And to me, that's the CEO. And if
Right.
CEO's letting the CFO hire people, whatever he or she wants.
I'm not talking about the
Which
hiring,
one are you
I'm
talking
about the work plan and performance appraisal, day-to-day.
So it's, you're happy with CEO all along there? Okay.
So,
Small work assignments?
the day-to-day supervision is not the CEO, it's going to be the department head as well as the CFO.
Right, but
Because it's all,
that doesn't have to do with the board staff
yeah,
relations.
that's why this is
Right.
actually not important
This is
for us.
us to
I don't think we
staff.
should have this there.
We're just have
I don't think this is important for us, this
Well-
last line.
So
do we-
anytime
should
you
we
see
even have that
CEO, it's
last line?
always the CEO, or it can be CEO and his appropriate delegates.
Yeah.
Is the other RA staff defined
It's the CEO
in
and
that, in the
delegates.
current resolution?
No, no.
So do we even need that line?
Yeah, we don't need
It,
that
it
line.
is mentioned in the resolution. It is mentioned in the
bylaws.
Yeah,
resolution.
it's mentioned that basically any requests for work go through the CEO. And so, like in the draft one that was in your board packet,
Yeah,
Yep, so we can say
small
CEO
work
and
assignment, it
delegates.
says CEO, BOD through P, and then individual directors, and I was gonna.
With copy to the CEO.
Well, that's not what it says though, so I was gonna recommend it. I don't like this box.
which box?
Wait,
The
this
one
is-
where on
this is
small
in-
work
this is in a
assignments?
This is in the draft that's already filled out in your packet.
Yeah,
We got it.
right.
So what,
Because
How would you put it?
I think any small work assignment should go through the CEO.
Yep.
Yeah, I do too.
Because, if I'm the one who has to determine, do we have the necessary resources?
Right.
On hand right now, they're not working on some other project, whether it's, aquatics covenants or whatever. That's a determination that I should make.
Yes,
Not-
I agree.
I don't
It's your
think
ship.
Those requests should come from an individual board member or anything.
Okay, let me give you a counter example. Let's say that you're gone up to the mountains, and,
I'd have an acting though.
huh?
I would have an
You'd have-
acting.
You would have an acting,
Yeah.
but you don't, but the acting may not know all the guts and feathers. And I have a question about covenants that I know Anna will know. So what I typically do in such a case is I email Anna with a copy to you, so that you know I'm asking her, and I don't ask any big stuff. Isn't that appropriate for small tasks?
Or would you
Rather
rather
than
it come-
getting your permission?
Or would it be
But-
better to go to Larry and copy Anna so she knows that this request might be coming through?
Well,
and
sometimes I do it that way too.
She can reflect on whether or not,
The important thing is that I think anytime a director requests work of the staff,
yeah,
the CEO should be copied.
I agree.
I mean, I just,
So-
That's a foregone conclusion in my.
Absolutely.
in my-
Minimally a copy. What about permission for small tasks?
I think you end up putting the staff in kind of a trick box because
Yep.
every, staff knows they ultimately work for
Who
the
do they
board.
report to,
And so
right.
if one of Anna's covenants administrators has to drop what they're doing to respond to you, and Anna hasn't been looped in, or Larry hasn't been looped in, and Anna hasn't had a chance to participate in the discussion, say, Larry, listen, I'm swamped, I've got to get 500 POA packages out today, and something like that, it ends up putting the staff in a position where they want to appease their big boss,
Yeah.
but at the same time, they upset their actual direct supervisor. So that's my only concern, is you kind of, by putting it in a resolution that this can be done, you're just kind of putting the staff in an awkward position. But I take your point, like, you know, the only way around that is to make sure that we're following our acting CEO procedure, and that we do make sure that somebody's here to mind the store that has enough knowledge that they can get you your answer and appropriately task staff. And I don't know how that's done. That's above my pay grade, to be perfectly honest.
I think we make it too complicated. I think just CEO in there is perfectly fine.
Julie, you started asking this question, but why is that even on there at all? Because this
Yeah.
is about the relationship of the board to
As you
the
said,
top
it's in the
three.
resolution.
It's also, the resolution mentions other staff.
Does it need to be?
There
We're
are
rewriting the resolution. Does it even need to be?
I think it does, because in fact, board members do it anyway.
Well, but
They do it anyway. We need to have an open discussion and set down rules we're willing to follow about how we should do it.
Then I think CEO for both of those
CEO,
ones.
then there's some big.
if they all say
expectations of the
CEO, it's one
You're
sentence
trying
in the
to be
resolution.
Yeah, let's just,
But if it's a CEO, I mean, it's going to be ultimately my call, and I'm
Right.
responsible to the board anyway. So
Right.
if the board ultimately says, you know, I've made 20 requests in the last 2 months for these small work items, he hadn't done a damn one of them, that's a problem, you know? And so I
Right.
think the important link there is that, you know, and the staff look up to me, you know, to be that go-between between the board. I mean, there's an expectation there.
Don't report to the
So
board,
how
they
would you,
report
how
to
would
you.
you put it, Larry? How would you fill in that?
I would just leave it
box?
as CEO.
Yep.
Simple as
I
that.
would agree.
So
So it
both
could be-
both
Not
CEO
individuals,
done?
not individual staff.
CEO.
So there was criticism and irritation
Although,
by the
Classy,
board
sorry, staff.
last year of precisely the inability to talk to staff. There was a big,
Well, this
So
isn't
there's-
says you can't talk to them, it
so
says
there's,
assignments.
that's where I was about to address, that's where the communication comes in, right? I mean, will the CEO prevent the staff from even, running into them outside a tennis court and asking a question?
She manages his
Yeah,
staff.
I know, but the question is, can they talk, right? And last year, that was one of the problems, the last few years, that at least the impression we definitely had was the staff will not say a word, because
My-
unless it's.
we
approved.
should not make rules that we're not willing to faithfully obey.
Yeah.
So if we want more flexibility, we should write the flexibility in. That's my point. Because if we approve rules and then disregard them, it causes confusion in the organization. It can, for example, I am not the boss of any employee in RA. I am not. The board is the sole boss. And under the board, the CEO. I am not anybody's boss.
Right.
And the president isn't, the vice president, I happen to be secretary, the treasurer isn't, other board member is not the boss of anybody. So we need to have that in mind and live by it, because it causes grave confusion. I've seen it in so many organizations.
So you make a good point, John. So I'm making the distinction here. It kind of goes into what you were saying, Sridhar, is that, you know, I trust my staff. So if John has a question and you want to call Laura about a pool thing, right? You know, I don't see a problem with that. She's going to tell me.
Yeah.
Hey, I gotta call John.
She should.
Yeah. And most of the staff here do. They let me know when a board has made an inquiry. The distinction I'm making here is a workload effort.
Mhm.
Right,
It's not a contact point. It's
right.
I've been asked to do something that may
Assignments.
take me 2 or 4 hours, which is going to take me away from 2 or 4 hours of other things I was doing. And that's what I'm reacting to, not, hey, I got a question about boats, and I'm going to call Nikki.
Right. So how, Larry,
How do we make that
how do we
distinction?
fill that box in to preserve all of that flexibility, but clarity and workload balance and supervision by the CEO that you've just articulated? How do we fill in that second to last, that enchanting second to last box there?
I think my response to that is I'd rather sit down and actually look at the resolution, because again, it's the contact piece that I'm really focused on here. So I think we need to preserve the contact piece this is fine for actual workload stuff. A task, not an individual phone call. Hey, I remember you sent an email, 3 months ago. Can you send that to me again or something?
Right.
I'm less concerned about that. Those are quick things. It's if the
This is
board
an
member is
assignment.
taking one or more staff to do a project. Again, small project. But
That should be.
Council may
broadly-
disagree.
Yeah, it says assignment.
It's a pretty simple clause. What you would say is, it's resolved that under no circumstances may a board member task any staff, would carve out the ones above. However, nothing in this clause is intended to preclude the board from contacting staff.
Communication.
Communication. So all you'd have to do is carve out, but what it's saying is, if you're going to task them,
Right.
I want this
The
done.
CEO is the only
Say,
one who can
CEO,
task.
I want
Right.
this done.
So what it now talks about is small tasks and small inquiries.
I would think it would say CEO tasks, and then
BOD and
BOD, or, and D, for inquiries.
But inquiries can be long too. So
Right.
I tend to go with small and large because, quite frankly, it works well with Fairfax County and Arlington County. I've seen it. I've managed it. I've managed that task system with the board as assistant county manager. I know it works. And I know it is a neuralgic point in organizations if we screw it up.
And the other thing that I would say too, though, and it kind of goes back to that whole trust thing, is that I trust that my staff's going to come to me. If they get a request from a board member, and let's say it's an inquiry, and the board member may think that's a small inquiry, and I trust my staff is going to come to me and say, I got this request. I think it's a little more complex than what the board member perhaps thought. Well, I'm going to pick up the phone, and we're both going to get on the phone and say, let's figure this out and see what that is. So I have an expectation that those things are going to come to my attention anyways.
Okay.
We'll get them resolved.
Do you want to?
Okay.
So we can finish. Do you want to suggest fill-ins for the last two? We'll put them in yellow, indicating we need. You said
Yeah.
you want to think about it more.
Yeah, let's do that.
So fill it in, Larry. What would you say?
CEO.
CEO tasks.
Yeah, CEO, and then I can add a little
task
more
directors,
definition to it if
inquiries.
you'd like. Not right here.
Okay.
We got a lot more to cover tonight.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I think, let's.
And
take
certainly
it
CEO is the last one.
Right.
Does anybody doubt that the CEO
No.
is
Yeah.
me? Okay. So yellow that one. Okay.
All
Shall we
right.
call it good for the night?
Boom.
Well, you wanted to go back to the one about the
CEO with board
CEO
approval.
with board approval. You said you wanted to see the
Should
road
not be
finish.
highlighted.
Correct.
I
And
don't know why it's highlighted, we should.
Well,
Well,
because
we didn't all
there's not
agree.
unanimity
all
on
agree
it.
on that.
I'm fine
I
with
think we
it.
do.
No.
I just want to make sure all the rest of the rows work. The rest of the
Okay,
rows-
do we want to vote on the CEO with board approval for CFO?
there's no voting tonight.
No, I mean.
But you guys
if
are going to
we
go write this thing. We ought to
Because-
vote on
I
it.
think that's what I think that's where it is right now.
Yeah,
That's all
So
right.
I'm okay
why
with
is it highlighted?
I'm all for it.
Okay.
I'm all for it, yeah.
I'm uncomfortable, but I'll go with it.
Okay, that's
All
for
right.
it.
Let's go.
And we have-
Next,
we want-
recreation.
Move the
Are we
highlight.
done yet?
Remove the highlight.
Remove the highlight.
Yeah, should we take a 5-minute break, guys?
That was a majority.
Cookie time.
I'm already did. I'm uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, okay.
Couldn't wait any
Next, are we
longer.
done?
All right, we're going to stop for 5 minutes.
Motion to recess.
Motion to recess, okay? Do I have a motion to recess?
So moved.
So move.
Second,
Second.
anyone? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Parks and Recreation, so we've had this,
Is there a document we're supposed to be
Before.
looking at?
I'm sorry?
Is there something I'm supposed to be looking at? Is it in my box?
Yeah, it's inside the, It is inside, whatchamacallit, the meeting materials.
Starting with the
Larry, are you going to throw that? up there?
Oh, okay, a hard copy, that's all I can.
Just the item
Oh,
summary.
you got it?
Yeah, the item summary, yeah.
What's our goal here, Larry, to, on this next hour?
The things-
do a 2-second overview. There's been a lot of discussion starting last year of the budget development, running right through the winter, about particularly the facilities, cost of facilities, on maintaining, improve, enhance, all those kinds of things. And there's been a lot of questions floated around about, we don't have enough information to make decisions on that.
Right.
And I don't believe the board as a whole has, there were some discussions during the budget sessions, but those were really focused on getting to the end of the road on that budget last year.
Right.
So we thought, I and certainly Laura thought it important that there just be a dialogue about what information you all need
Mhm.
to make decisions about facilities going forward. And what information exists, what doesn't exist, what can we do as a staff, with our existing resources and talents, and what can we not do without some assistance. And it's really just to frame the discussion for you all to say, what is that information? And I was telling Sridhar actually in the bathroom, I said, the impression I get is that each person, if I would ask Andy, what information do you need? I suspect it's going to be different than what Julie needs in terms of what's the body of information I need to make decisions on the facilities. But it would be helpful for the staff to get direction from the board as a whole before we go on some hunt or scramble, that there's an agreement on the information we're going to gather, produce, hire a consultant, whatever that may be, whatever form that takes, that it's coming from the board as a whole, and there's agreement on that. So that's the break.
Okay.
I'm going to push back while you're looking at that to say it would be easier for me if the staff then gave a recommended, here are the things that we believe are important as data points, as input to make an informed decision on this type of thing. What are there things in here that are not helpful? Are there other things that are not here that you would like to see? Something like that, rather than go from a green field. So how do you make decisions? How do you and Laura think if you want to look at a facility that you think, what are the data points you want to see before making decisions? So if I could see those, that would help me then decide, okay, yep, this makes sense to me too. Or no, I don't need to know all this stuff. I can just see a few of those things. Or gosh, I really want to see X. How hard is it to get X? And then you could say really hard, Andy, or no, not hard at all. We could get X. So I'd like something like that. Does that make sense what I'm asking for or no?
It does, and I will tell you that my initial response is that staff put a ton of effort into the 2005 PROS plan, which we thought was a pretty good start on the kinds of information to analyze facilities and to some
This
degree,
way.
to some degree programs. And can it be improved upon? Sure. And I would look for your input. I hope everybody's taking the time to at least scan it.
Mhm.
As an example, the swimming pool assessment that was done in there, we took a much deeper dive with a consultant on swimming pools because we knew they were, on an ongoing annual basis, they're the most expensive facility we have. Discount. So, and they're partially they're expensive because they have to be staffed by code.
Yeah.
You got people working there.
Right.
So we looked at that specifically. So if nothing else, I would ask you to read the swimming pool assessment in the 2005 PROS plan and say, what's missing from that? Because that data, we can develop a lot of that internally. It's not going to happen overnight. But I know, I think Sridhar, there were some other metrics that you were interested in that weren't there.
Yep.
But as a baseline start, I would say kind of look at that. Because we can do that kind of thing for most of our facilities at this point.
Julie, go ahead.
So, as part of the work that both PRAC in the past year plus in trying to get a sense of how might PRAC tackle this question of of recreational use and where to spend stuff. You know, there's been some data points that we said we didn't get from the George Mason study, right? We didn't get in PROS. There's data now that we're able to collect by having the web track system in on the pool usage, and hopefully we'll get that on tennis as well, so that you have to swipe to get in to use our tennis courts. I think that there's census data that we ought to be able to look at now to say, what do we see changing in our area, Fairfax County? You know, I think that we know better how to do some of the focus group kinds of outreach, you know, to be a bit more targeted. So when I look at it, the things I feel I don't know are things like, how do you measure the intrinsic value of a recreational facility to me looking at it as, how does it add to my value as a homeowner, or my being part of this community? Is that, you know, something that the current population, you know, we've gotten a lot of feedback and saying, you know, hey, our trails are really important to our community, and it's not just as recreational, but it also factors into that, you know, being able to use them for bikes or the what's it called? Biophiliac.
Biophilic.
You know, with the cities, you know, and how do we get those check marks in terms of how is Reston viewed from a community outside of ourselves, you know, how are we recognized? So I think part of my difficulty is that intrinsic, you know, measurements, the intangibles that aren't there. I hesitate when I look at the pool data over the last couple of years as I've been reflecting on this and looking at it and how we make our decisions on what hours to have pools open. It kind of gets skewed because are the pools that are being used, are they because they, in their last renovation, added a water feature that wasn't, you know, we've got a sequence of updating our pools and making them more current, right? So how does that change that data? You know, what if I had that? Would somebody drive to another, you know? I saw an email just in the last week because they're like, well, why doesn't this pool have adult, sorry, I'm not supposed to say adult, fitness hours, right? And I don't have it at my pool, and I'm like, well, you can walk to that one. Right? It's not that far of a walk. If you're going for fitness hours, maybe you should be able to walk to that other pool, you know?
Maybe they're not fit yet.
Maybe they're not fit yet, right, but, you know, so part of it's, how do we match the population or the community around it to the facility, which I thought Hook Road, using that as a working group, kind of helped us say, is it good the way it is? What changes ought to be there, if any, you know? And whether it's a pool or it's a park or it's, you know, or even though it's not in the charter for the lake boat whatever working group, you know, it doesn't say, oh, tell me how you're going to address more hand carry boat access, right? Just says lake access. And so how does that, something like that, get factored in? Pickleball. We never had to deal with pickleball. Now we have pickleball. And what's the growing need for that? So I just think there's a lot of insights that we need to do. I'm not comfortable with the George Mason study and the sampling of what that got. I just can't believe that that should be something we can hang our hat up on. It may be statistically correct, but it's pretty correct return. Because again, the people who respond are the people who have a particular axe to grind, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that helps you any. I know we all got some analysis by one member this past week about the recreational facilities discussion. I don't know if anybody happened to have a chance to read that, but somebody did respond to us on June 3rd. And it was sent to the Board of Directors, by the by. So you might want to take a glance at that.
Anyone else? John? Sherry?
What do we get the full report opposed to just the executive?
Any comments?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, go
It
ahead.
says on here it's in our Dropbox, but I don't see it.
So.
It's not there in the Dropbox. Yes, John?
I understand how what I'm about to say could tend to make the task we're talking about more difficult, indeed impossible. But I want to say it anyway. And that is, and I've had the opportunity to chat with several of you individually. I'm concerned about the relationship between facilities and programs, because facilities are valuable as the home of programs, whether they're formal programs or informal. You know, I go off hiking on our trails, which I do. And obviously, what our programs are and what we foresee that they should be or will be affects what we do with our facilities. And then when we start talking about programs, then if we do, we have to talk about, and we had some lively debate about this last year. What is the appropriate scope of RA programs? You know, what is inappropriate, what is appropriate? So we had our discussion about after school care programs, for example.
Right.
But what are the limits? You know, what is the appropriate scope? What are the demographic trends? So what's happening to us demographically in terms of increased population, aging of population, ethnic mix of population, language mix of populations, and so forth? And how will that affect the programs and therefore the use of facilities? Leisure trends, you know. Who would have thunk pickleball, 5 years ago? But now we have pickleball, and then data on what is the actual program usage, and then, how do we, taking into consideration all the other things, how do we project pool usage, soccer usage, baseball, and so forth. And Shwedar and I have spoken a lot about this last year, and that is how do we deal with the question of the equitable distribution of programs? So in terms of areas of RA, north, south, and so
north,
forth.
South, even within that.
How do we talk about equitable distribution among age groups, ethnic groups, and so forth, which may have certain needs? So it may be soccer and baseball and tennis and pools that get most of the attention because that's most of the people. But there are some people who may not like any of them but have a desperate need to have leisure programs that we're not meeting. How do we figure out
address their concerns.
the equity of that? And obviously, and then a third consideration is the affordability of it. How do we afford it? What can we? Some people say, well, just add more to my assessment. Some people can't bear more to their assessment. How do we balance
To come up
that?
with a different model.
So the question of facilities, programs, and affordability, as I've outlined, they're connected. And how far can we go on facilities without getting into the other stuff?
Good. Thanks, John. Karen, any comments?
Not yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about, the data is probably, we've gotten a lot of data, over the course of the last 2 years. And what I don't think we as a board have come to grips with is our philosophy about kind of the stuff you just talked about. And something that could be foundational, to Reston, because this board will turn over in a year, and it'll turn over again in a year after that, and it'll turn over. So, you don't want to be jerking the staff around saying, well, this year this is really important, but then next year's board thinks that's really important, and we're never moving forward because we're always trying to, the staff is always just trying to meet what the board's asking for. And so, For me, the only way I can get my head around all of it is a couple things. One is I think it's really important when we think about programming is that we look at what's around us already. You know, a lot of programs are already being offered, and I don't feel like Reston Association certainly can't be all things to all people, especially when we have others in the community that are offering, whether it's the community center, you know, offering fitness or whatever that may be. I think we always have to be looking at what others are doing, and we don't need to compete with them. We're an HOA. We don't need to compete with the people that are maybe, one, doing it for a business, that maybe it's their livelihood, and secondly, if we're already paying for RCC to do stuff, why are we paying double? The other thing is looking at the current pace of where we are maintenance-wise on some of these facilities. So it's nice to say, let's look at, and I'm a proponent of it, I just don't think we can get our head around it. I can't, at least not now, is if we looked at all the pools. Well, all the pools don't have to be looked at right now. If we've just renovated a pool, we're not touching that pool, right? Because we just spent all this money on it, and it's, you know, it's probably got fancy fountains, and it's, you know, fancy stuff for the kids, and that's a pool that's going to be there a while. When we look at other pools that are coming up for renovation, and I'm not sure that, what is it, Julie, again? Thoreau?
Grow.
I'm not sure that was coming up for looking at it again, or it just so happens it's,
It's next in the,
so it was already next, so it's
Yeah,
not like it's
yeah, we
falling
pushed
into
it
the lake
back.
ahead of time, it's doing it on schedule.
right,
Except that we did have an engineering evaluation done.
yes.
Yeah,
And it's in dire need of repair.
Yeah, that's what we heard.
Yeah, so that's why it was.
we heard
like-
maybe one more year.
Yeah,
Right, or
Chris
two.
can provide more details on that if you wanted.
But let's
So-
assume that it isn't, because that's part of what we had said, why we had to do this.
Yeah, so we went on our field trip, we knew that that pool was in danger, and it's a beautiful plot of land that it sits on, right on the lake. But is looking at the facilities as they come, and I know that that's kind of counter to what we've said just recently, that we want to look at things holistically. However, we can only look at things as, one, they need it because it's a safety issue. And so how do you address that particular pool with the dollars that we have? And so for me, something like that, Larry, and this would have to be a decision of the board because it's just one opinion, is if you looked at that pool, and it could be the Tall Oaks pool, it could be any pool. So it's not, I'm not picking on any particular pool, just this one has a huge dollar price tag coming with it, is if you did something different there, maybe it's not a pool anymore, maybe it's what was that sport that was so, became kind of a bocce ball?
Bocce ball.
Bocce ball. If it became a bocce ball court, whatever.
Hard on the hill.
Is it on a hill? Yeah, you're at a disadvantage part of the game, and then you're at an advantage another part of the game. But, you know, do you take that, could you take some of that money and then upgrade other pools that may be nearby? Maybe you can take a pool, and, you know, Julie, you and I have talked about different ways to use pools. So could you reinvest the money from that pool and do something with the pools nearby so the people that are nearby think they haven't lost everything, but they've gained something because the next door pool is now more enhanced. Maybe it has a jacuzzi or something now, I don't know. So I don't think I'm asking for any data, Larry, except that the board, I think we need to have a pragmatic discussion about how we're going to adjust facilities. Philosophy has to meet dollars, has to meet program needs, has to meet pragmatic, you know what I'm
Programmatic.
That's the word.
Okay.
Needs. And so we can say pie in the sky, let's just make everything beautiful, let's gold plate everything, but we can't. And we need to be realistic. And the public has to be realistic with us.
Sure.
And unless we want to see assessments continue, I mean, we dropped them last year, start seeing that, or we need to make a change in our structure. Make people pay more for the facilities they want to use. So if you want to be a pool member and you want to pay an extra $400 a year in assessments, then we do that. If we want to keep all the pools open, well, I don't use a pool, so why am I going to pay all this? I mean, so there's a whole way of restructuring, but that's beyond me.
That really
So-
gets, that
so
gets
can I-
it.
can I
I
make
just
some
want to,
comments?
well, I have one data point to share with Sherry. PrAC did do an analysis of what programs were around us and what things they brought to the table.
Okay.
So we do have some data points on that.
Okay, good.
Okay, so
But
you
yeah.
started it, Andy, so I'm going to jump in here. So to take off from what you said as well. So from my perspective, data, I think I've discussed it with you, and in the last year and change, what I've seen is, some people are okay with assessments going up, some people are not okay with that. So you have a lot of debate over this issue. And I don't think the public fully understands the costs related to all the facilities, the amenities that we have. And I break that down into two parts. The investment that we have to make, like the Lake Thoreau now, to rebuild it, right, to renovate it, as well as the ongoing operating expenses, whether it's baseball or tennis or pools or pickleball or people. I don't think there is enough information out there that reduces it on a per person basis or per household basis. Here's what you spend on baseball. Here's what you spend on pools. Here's what you're spending, right? And then if I was making an investment, if I'm an investor coming into Reston and I'm investing in all the amenities as a business, this is how I would look at it. I would look at how much we are investing in each of these, how much we are spending on each of these. What is the demand projection, right? Which captures a lot of, and usage. I know you talked about program versus facilities. I would suggest a different way of looking at it. Usage, whether it is for a program or somebody just walking up and down the trail, they're all usage basically captures the data, which goes back to using the rec track to capture the pool usage or tennis court usage, and it's not yet fully there, but hopefully we'll get there. So I would look at it as, collecting, having all the data, right, and breaking it down into, bite-sized information from multiple perspectives. Breaking it down also within Reston. Today we have 4 districts. I would break it down to even smaller segments so that we can actually match, the facilities to where people live, right? And that's where we go into how many pools do we need within a 1 mile radius for everybody, right? If there is a pool, do we need to have 3 pools in that place? If you've got most of the people living there, maybe. So that's where I would like to approach this as overlaying multiple sets of data on this, right, different layers, and use that as a basis for us to look at as well as present it to the public and say that, say for example, Hunterswood Dogwood, right? The usage for pools is low or high, right, relative to this. You take the number of people living there, look at the demographic growth, and then you make a judgment call as to what is it that they want and how should we be reallocating resources, going back to the equity question as well, right? How should we be reallocating resources for that? But you can also step back and say that we can be all things to everybody, right? Which means we can present that option to the public and say that, yeah, you want all 15 pools to be open starting May, early May, all the way through to past Labor Day weekend, here's what it's going to cost you, right?
If you can
And
find the
then one
staff.
of the things last year I was hoping to get all this analysis done last year is to, I want to hold that comment right now because it's the restructuring comment. I want to think through that some more in terms of how we can restructure the assessment, how we do the assessments itself, how we, impose that on people as well. Because right now it's one number that is applied across the board and people are buying pool and swim passes, pool and tennis passes, paying $30.
We don't make them buy
$30,
lake
right?
access.
Yeah, so that's it, which is actually.
Make them buy a trail access.
Which is, exactly, but lake, here's the question, right? One of the facilities, amenities that flies under the radar that people don't really, which is why I want to reduce all the amenities and facilities and put them by in a number of users and by areas, because nobody's looking at lake use. Nobody's looking at the dredging cost for lakes, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah,
a
we
pretty
are.
significant cost. But if you're doing a backstop for $70,000 for baseball, or if you're doing lighting in a tennis court, everybody sits up and takes notice, right? So that's why I want to put all the information at this, on the same level.
That's a
And
good
then,
point.
so the public understands, so it's available for them to look at, and then we look at all the capital projects from that perspective. And I know that's a little bit more of an intense exercise, but I think it'll actually be pretty educational for all of us, if we looked at it from that perspective. And I was really hopeful of doing that even the first year, but I haven't had the time, but I'm hopeful. that
Realistically,
can do
we
it.
can't get there.
Yeah.
We have a small staff
I know.
in the finance area. We can't get there for this certainly next budget cycle.
I was going to do it last year myself. I just haven't had the
Oh.
time.
We do have the listening sessions in the fall in terms of some way that we might be able to also gather some data. I know we got some limited time. I remember a couple years ago, we had some sessions across the board, and Kate had a way of, we put dollars into buckets,
Yeah.
right? Kind of exercise. And there may be something along those lines that we could do to solicit information back. On the usage data, though, part of the problem, I don't think we track this. We'd have to check with Laura, but I don't think we track, okay, well, this person lives in North Point, but they're going over to the Glade Pool because that's where the water feature is, right, or the slide, or whatever.
And you can actually, once you set up the cards, the access mechanism that way, you can track the unique users, you can track which facility they're using, all the data, once you have the,
Set it
the
up so we
software
can
set
pull
up,
the
it's pretty
data.
easy to extract and.
Right, if we have it set up
As
that way.
an IBMer,
I know.
Yeah. So,
Data
and I think,
analytics.
yeah, and that's something that, I know we are not there today, but, if we can figure out a way to do that, then I think
What's
we'll
the
have.
projection for when
real-
we'll have that usage information?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What's the projection for when we'll have comprehensive
So
usage?
we'll have that for two of the pools,
Yeah,
Lake Newport and Glade pools. However,
we won't have the data on all the pools yet. I don't think the web track's going into all the pools yet.
it's not yet. Part of the problem was the wireless infrastructure, and then we lost the IT guy that was doing it, so I don't know when we'll actually have, all of that in place unless that has
I mean, it
changed
may
in the
be
last
like-
1 month.
Like we've talked about, we may end up saying this is a multi-year task.
It could be, yeah.
To
it
look
could
at
be.
this, to get the kind of data we know that we need, which is why we had to put this stuff in.
Right.
Maybe that we have to deal with one item first. Like, that's why I gave you that pool analysis and said, here's the next set of pools that's scheduled for maintenance or renovation or whatever. Think about how we need to approach that.
And even if we were to do it over a couple of years, it's a good thing because all this ultimately, the decisions that we make place into the reserve study, right? Because each of these amenities, each of these facilities will have to be renovated. As these projects come up, you're going to, then it helps us make the decision, should we do this or not? So I think I would certainly like to have all those pieces inside, in
Those of you that
tracking
just got
people,
elected
the
for
user
3 more
tracking
years, it'll have to be
usage.
Your project.
I'm sorry?
Good thing I've been on prac, huh?
Or to those of you that just got elected for 3 more years, it'll have to be your project.
Yeah. Andy, go ahead.
So, I certainly think
Ha-ha.
a cost-benefit analysis is always useful. I mean, and so certainly if costs are so egregious that it just engineering-wise makes it, unreasonable, that's a data point one needs.
Yeah.
You just brought up a point I think is super important. Every 5 years, we do a capital reserve study. We have to do one in 2019.
2019.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've suggested we
And
move it up.
in 2019, and 4 years ago, we set up, a financial resolution 3 that said we will use that study to ensure that we build the repair and replacement fund to adequately fund everything in that study for that 10-year period.
Right.
So that there's no surprises, there's no spikes because, there's 3 pools this year. No, we knew that, and we built a ramp so that we can take money out of a bank, put money in a bank. So I think the capital reserve study is huge. And the last point is, we talk a lot about land use, and we talk a lot about 60,000 people here, and we talk a lot about that there might be 120,000 people here in 30 years from now or 40 years from now. So I'm going to come from a lens, a standpoint that if we're going to double the population, it's important. It's a nice data point to know what the usage is right now in a certain pool, but I don't think that's not going to be a major priority point with me now. In 30 years, when we double the population of Reston possibly, and we see if what's happening to these pools, then I think that's a more relevant data point at that stage. But the thought of closing anything with all this extra population coming into our geographic area, that's a
And
hard sell for me.
I don't think we are talking about closing at all. I mean,
I'm just
that's
saying,
where the demand projection
and I'm not
comes
saying we
in.
are, I'm just saying that's where
I don't want people to freak out that we are
No, but
trying
I'm
to
just
decide
saying-
to close anything. We're not
But if you
doing
think
that.
The
about
idea
that, the
of
fact that we
there's
do,
extra people coming in, that my baseline is going to be, we need to fund keeping these things operational, open, in
Right,
good
and so
repair
part of-
via the capital reserve study, and obviously the
Could we just
Yeah.
throw
but
out
part
that
of that population growth isn't even going to be members of Reston
we're still fight we have to
Association.
fight?
You know, when we look at the population growth, it's not necessarily that they are going to be Reston Association members. A lot of what we're seeing is external, and we can't force that. But what we can do is say, we have these facilities, and they are available to you at a cost. We already have programs that say, non-RA members can buy into a seasonal pool pass, whatever, and we can look at how do we increase how many of those we get and market those to those developments. We might be able to, look at, and I had this idea the other week, I must have woken up from some dream, and I'm not sure I'm going to articulate it correctly at the moment, but part of my thought was, is there a way from a political standpoint in negotiating with the county and how developments come and the people come who are not members, that there is some incentive to say, well, if you're going to add these, you need to contribute because we can't control access to our paths, access to the enjoyment of our amenities. Now, yes, we could do that on pools, but, I remember when the Tall Oaks pool, we looked for a proffer to just help support
Yeah, they took it.
funding Tall Oaks pool a bit more, given that there were going to be 400-some units there. How many more people were going to suddenly use that pool? And the county said, no,
We're going to take it.
no, you don't get any proffer for that.
And I certainly agree with you that, I guess the only point I was making is that those are all possibilities of how we will deal with this.
Right.
Non-member passes, are they going to become members of the association? All sorts of those are all possibilities.
But we
But the
can't-
main thing are these actual physical things that we own
Right.
right now that we need to maintain, we need to repair
And we
and
budgeted
replace.
for them in the
and-
reserve study.
And they need to all be in
some
the
level.
reserve study that we need to help Larry make well next year in 2019.
And I think we've also learned in the last year or so that that reserve study only went so far. There were a lot of missing elements in there that
Cost estimates were.
got,
low.
Soft costs, they called it, right?
a little, yeah, we didn't get down to the level that we needed to. And I know we've looked at,
Do
could
we need to make
we?
a better job?
too.
Do we need to do a more intense job
Oh,
with
yeah.
the
Yeah,
capital reserve
and we-
study? And that's the point.
and we
where we're
also
saying
looked at-
supporting Larry to do
That's the
that.
plan.
Which
One of the
is-
things that Laura and Larry and I have looked at is there's some money in the current budget that might have gone towards, say, engineering workers, look-see at Thoreau. Well, maybe we could take that money and say, advance the reserve study element for the pools, just the pool piece, and see if we can't get that data sooner than later to help us on this immediate need to figure something out on Thoreau. And I think the next one was,
But when you say, help me understand what we need to figure out. We need to figure out how much it's going to cost to fix it. Okay, we need that, but that's part of,
We actually, on Lake Thoreau, we've got,
okay.
We'll-
So, but I mean, when you
We'll
say,
pick
so
that up
when we
now.
get a number, what are we figuring out?
well, for the 2019 budget, and I think there's a
whether
little
we're
bit of
gonna
money.
do it or not.
We
Right.
had, for Thoreau, we have to decide what we're doing.
Whether we, yeah.
And so it's in the capital reserve study, it's in the plan for repairing next year.
It's,
There's a certain amount of money in there now, and it
Chris
probably
is
is
There's
shaking
no-
his,
not.
no,
Why
it's not.
doesn't Chris join us at the table?
please.
no,
Is that okay, Mr. Chairman, to have?
can we not have a detailed discussion on Lake Thoreau today?
Well, we can-
Well, we-
Because we have questions to address
Can,
right
but
now.
he just, he can answer some of
Sit
Andy's
there.
questions.
Which question?
what's in the budget right now?
It is in the 2019, but the cash is not allocated. It'll come out of the budget when we allocate the triple RF as part of 2019. The money is, there's some money in the triple RF budget, but if we include Lake Thoreau next year in 2019, that money we will allocate it as part of the budget approval and assessment approval this year. Is that helpful?
So what's,
I'm not asking you, I'm asking Julie.
Andy
Again,
asked some
you said
questions.
if we had data, we'd figure it out, and I'm just trying to figure out what it is we figure out. I mean, I'm assuming that it's right now is in the reserve study, is something we have to do next year, evidently. There's a certain amount of money that was estimated that it's going to cost. You're going to get some more detailed money now that maybe more than that amount of money. And there's a little bit of flex in our capital reserve repair and replacement fund to either say, yep, we can live with that by taking a little bit more out of that reserve fund than we thought we were going to with the original estimate, or I guess we don't. We don't think we have enough, flex to do that. Is that what we're going to figure out? Is that the figure out we're talking about?
I
well,
don't know, but she used the figure out expression, but Chris, why don't you?
so in this year's budget in capital, we currently have, I think it's $40,000 for Lake Thoreau. It was basically long-range planning monies, but it's basically allocated within the reserve study. And so we already have that in this year's budget. So we have that amount. Right now, I just have it in Q4 because we don't really, have a clear idea of what we're going to be doing with that exactly. So we have money if we need to do any kind of pre-study evaluation. We have funds for that. We have an on-call engineer who can do this kind of work as well, and they've got all the tools and the consultants and subcontractors to assist with that.
Right.
All the Lake Thoreau stuff was in 19 and was moved to 2020.
Yeah.
Moving it back is up to your discretion if you want to do that. There would still need to be a bit more vetting and confirmation of costs. And those costs are for like replacements.
Mm-hmm.
If there's any desire from the community to change that facility beyond its existing design, then it's going to require more money potentially, more than likely.
And is the ballpoint figure around a million?
It was just around that. After we evaluated all the large key pieces, it was right around that amount. And that was from a general estimate from a contract we worked with a lot.
And again, from a schedule perspective, this is not something that we need to decide today, which is the reason why I didn't want to go into the detail. This will come as part of the capital projects, budget as we move along. And I think by the time the data, the figuring out part, what you're saying is, let's get all the data and look at that, and we're going to figure out what
I
we're
was
going to do.
suggesting on the reserve study is if a big piece that we're trying to address is pools and pool demand, and because it's a huge piece. Again, I go back to, I suggested that in this analysis of our amenities or recreation facilities, that we chunk it.
Mhm.
Because it's too much for us to boil the ocean.
A lot.
So if we could chunk it and say, let's look at the pools, let's move some of that reserve study from 2019 into 2018, get some accurate data on cost for replacement, because I know we've missed some things based on what I've seen over the last year or so. That would give us at least a little bit better handle on overall, because it's not just Thoreau. Like I said, there were like 5 in the next 5 years. I'm looking for.
That one's just a safety issue that keeps gnawing at me.
So,
That's the only reason I keep bringing that one is.
Right.
Because next summer, it probably won't open no matter what we do.
It's going to be closed next year, more than
They're
likely.
repairing it.
What we do with it, that's the difference. But more than likely, it's not going to be open next year. Now, we could use that as a data point to say, okay, we moved all the adult, I keep doing that, fitness hours from Thoreau to another pool and see how that feels for the neighborhood. They're okay with walking not, or walking to a different place,
Space over there. Really is a nice pool.
so again, so your request, I think maybe we take it in a regular board meeting, is to try to see if we should advance, the evaluation of the need for Lake Thorough. Is that what you're saying? The cost estimates and see what is it that, and then what is it that it's going to cost us to do? What we want to do, a like-for-like replacement. Is that what you're suggesting, Julie? And we don't have to have that conversation today, but
No.
is that what you're saying?
I think they've already done that.
Yeah.
To some, I mean,
To a degree.
To a degree, they haven't finished it.
Until you get a full-on evaluation. I mean, like, you're doing core samples and checking out underneath the deck, and this was just kind of a general walkthrough with the company, and he's like, all right, rough order of magnitude, we're going to do this and that, and, you know, there's kind of an assemblage of numbers that came to that.
I mean, Chris, I got a little stuck when you said, oh, I pushed this into fourth quarter because I'm waiting to see what's happening.
Because the board
I mean,
chose
but what-
last year to push it off.
To push it off to.
Push off the evaluation of the
Lake
detailed
Thoreau.
cost analysis?
Well,
or-
the dollar amount is for the planning and design piece, and, you know, the
40
original intention was
40,000.
that it would be, the planning part would be started in this year, and then the execution would be in 19. We moved all the execution pieces to 2020, but the planning piece was left in place. Now, that can be reallocated, and you can change how you want to use that money. Doesn't have to be for Thoreau, it could be used for something else that's
At
general
40,000.
planning, and it could be maybe
And we moved
reconstitute
it
for
to
that.
2020 because we felt that it has one more year of life out of 2019 into 2020? I don't get it. I wasn't here.
What was Dewberry's take on it?
Dewberry's take was from evaluating the key piece, which is the retaining wall. They had about 2 years life expectancy, in their professional opinion, and like, this is a safe range you have left
2 years from what point, Chris?
from last year.
Last end of 2017.
It was May of 17 when they did the evaluation.
Okay.
So 2 years would be obviously next year. Now, they said it, you know, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fail that day, you know, because they're never going to give you an absolute, you know, they're not going to give you an exact timeline of when that would happen, but from their opinion said, this is something you should address sooner rather than later. And the retaining wall is kind of this domino piece because it affects a lot of the site.
I guess I'm just at even a higher level, though. We had in a capital reserve study, an estimate of how much it would take to replace this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it was in 2019, evidently, that money was allocated.
Was
And
it?
then-
I don't know. Was it, Chris? can you
Original
talk to that?
budget, here's.
So the retaining wall, from remember, was like in the reserve study for around 375,000.
Again, what year is that pool supposed to be on the ticket for renovating?
I believe it was in 19.
Yeah, it says original budget was
2019,
shifted from
Okay, so in the
2019.
reserve study, we had in the reserve study that 2019, we needed to replace that pool, and we had a cost estimate for what it
Correct.
is. I think what I'm hearing is that maybe that will be low because we need to do a study, a more detailed engineering study, and we're worried because of retaining walls and other things, that number might be low or in the estimate. I don't know.
Well, it's also,
What do you want the pool to be?
There's an aggregation of things on the site. If you're going in there and you're taking out, let's just pick the number, $375,000 for the retaining wall, you're going to replace the main beam of the pool, you're going to replace the shell,
Yeah.
you're going to do all that while you're on site.
Sure.
And the aggregation of costs is
It's
the
about $1
roughly
million.
$1 million magnitude that Chris is talking
Yeah.
about.
And then we had things like handicap access, you know, whatever.
I guess
But
what was in
the
the
next
repair and
pool up-
replacement study? All those
Sherry?
things eventually?
The reserve
Golf
study.
Course Island.
Reserve study.
Reserve study.
A lot of those individual pieces, so the bigger pieces were kind of clustered together. But, you know, there were cascading, so you have one, you have to replace that, it affects another. And so some of those were further out, so they had to be brought up in order to be done, otherwise
They were in
it makes no
2020 or
sense, yeah.
2021.
Yeah.
Because you might do the retaining wall,
2019.
but it doesn't have necessarily the gunite shell. Well, you start doing things with the gunite, you gotta address the deck. The deck then addresses, and it kind of keeps going from that. So when you get to something like replacing retaining wall, it becomes more of a larger oversight replacement.
So at a high level, you had $1 million over 4 years, and now it's $1 million in 1 year.
More or less, but there were some inconsistencies with the retaining wall. What retaining wall in reserve said was 375. Evaluation from a contractor was actually it was closer to $500,000. So there,
$40,000 was to really get into the detail of how it needs to be done, the order of things, and the exact prices.
yeah, it was the planning of the project.
And this is just one pool. Similar story could be had with Golf Course Island, which is next, then Lake Audubon, then Ridge Heights, then Autumnwood.
Right.
That's the series of the next
So
five.
again,
I mean, we planned those in the reserve study.
so reserve
what's the
study is
question?
one, but,
grossly
you know,
under plan.
But
So you're saying all of them are underestimated? Is that what I
The
just
one
heard?
is
All
under-
of the pools are
A lot of-
underestimated?
I wouldn't say all the pools, but a lot of the large projects are underestimated because they do not include soft costs. And what we're finding out, as Chris can describe for you if you want, is that the regulatory requirements on us now from Fairfax County and the additional engineering and inspection costs and verification costs have added way more to those projects than we, even 5 years ago would have anticipated in our wildest dreams. So this, as you said, $375,000. 5 years ago, the estimate to replace that wall was $375,000. If I had a contractor look at it, say, you know what, that's $500,000.
Yeah.
So it's those kinds of orders of magnitude in the reserve study that are not just for pools.
Right.
So,
That's why I say, move the reserve study up.
The lesson to us is when we go into that reserve study next year, we need to look at, okay, the replacement cost isn't just the concrete for that wall.
Sure.
It's the design and engineering,
Fully
the
loaded
permitting,
cost.
all the soft costs.
Fully loaded cost.
Yeah.
How does replace?
So again, I want to bring it back. That's not the question we are discussing today, Lake Thoreau, so can we,
But it's
it's getting up to 9 o'clock.
example
We're not-
of the issues that we have at hand,
I know, so.
I guess what I'm leaving from this, if we're just is, hey, these are our facilities. We got to do a better job next year to support you to get fully loaded costs. But for everything in the near term, because I'm not worried about if a pool is less used or more used right now in the next 2 years. In my mind, unless these costs are egregious, like 4 times the amount or something crazy, and I want to look through the details with you guys, we need to figure out a way to pay for it.
So that means increasing assessments.
Whatever we need. Why is that? Do I know that for
I don't
sure
know
now?
that
No.
for sure.
We have $4 million sitting as
gotta
or
cut somewhere if you're gonna add
some
somewhere else.
$1 million sitting in our minimum balance of the reserve fund. And we've supposedly been putting enough money to pay for everything, even the underestimates, so that we have enough
But
to
they're
see
not
that.
all funded. So, I mean, the reserve study is an estimate of the assets that need to get replaced, updated
Agreed?
over a period of time. But the funding happens on an annual basis.
Right.
Rolling 10 years, we calculate how much it is, and we put 10% of that. 10% of the rolling forward cost.
I understand. I wrote
over
the
10 years.
resolution. I wrote
Right,
the-
so which means this year we put in 2.9 million into that. Next year I don't know where we'll end up based upon the capital projects, but we're going to be spending 3.5 to 4 million next year on capital projects. Doesn't mean that's the amount of money we'll take by way of assessments from the people. So
I agree.
so the 1 million is not fully funded today. So there are unencumbered funds, approximately 6 million, I would say 5.8, 5.9 million in RRF today. 3 of them in minimum balance in mutual funds, rest of it in, it's there to be used this year and end of this year when we allocate new money into that money will fund the RRF again. So I just want people to know that the money is not sitting there specifically for Lake Thoreau. It will get assigned, and through assessments, we will
Pegged
actually,
for. It's earmarked,
we will,
but it's
exactly. It's not even earmarked. It's earmarked in the reserve study.
Yes.
But it's not inside the RRF fund, nothing is earmarked or
I get that.
encumbered for Lake
But I-
Thoreau today, except for the 40,000. That's the only money that's specifically allocated for Lake Thoreau today.
So
I
to
just want
bring
people-
this home, back to what we were meeting on tonight, was what data do we
Yes,
need?
that's what I wanna get to.
help
Thank
make our
you.
decisions?
That
And
is what I want to get to.
So
Thank you.
if you have this in your head, granted, it's one example, but I think when you try to say to our membership, why are we doing what we're doing with Lake Thoreau Pool? You know?
So to me, it's
No.
show me the next 2 years. If it's going to take you 2019 to get the new reserve study, show me 2018, 2019, and maybe 2020 of the best estimate you have today of all of those projects, the exact money that's sitting in, the repair and replace fund, what we have, so we can see if we're spending all of this to replace these things, where is this fund falling? Is it falling negative? Well, that's obviously super
It's not-
bad. And so we could see that, because we need to replace these things. I'm not going to vote to not do a pool, not to do it. I mean, I don't care if there's, what the usage is right now.
So
But do
Andy,
you, I just want to ask a question, but do you care if that affects assessments $10, $20, $30 per household?
Well, and again, I don't think it's a mutually exclusive thing.
Well, I think if you spend more than you're bringing in, something's got to give, so something you can't do, or you raise assessments. And so I'm very uncomfortable going in with, we just have to fix everything.
But-
Because
but we
there are
have-
some people in my district, I know, they can't afford to pay more than what they're already paying in assessments.
Of course,
So-
assessments, we try and hold them down. To me, we pay for lots of things. We pay for lots of things at RA. The main things that we own as an association are the things that we all own jointly.
Correct.
The lakes, the pools, the tennis courts.
Right.
We
The
all
trails.
own those.
Right.
And so, to me, that's what we need to focus on first, in terms of, let's make sure that these
Where we spend our
are
money.
well cared for.
Yeah.
And again, the thought of closing something when we're 10, 20, 30 years away from when we think there's going to be an increase in population, whatever it is, up to 120, if we say that's our cap. I know we have a lot of land use things going on with the county right now, but we know it's going to be a lot more people in Reston in the corridor than we have now. And that those people, as non-residents, or as if Larry and others help us get them into the association as residents or part of our association members, we will have more people. So we don't know whether the usage today will
Reflect.
be similar or very different than the usage 10 years from now when we have all these extra people. So the thought of closing something now, to me, seems short-sighted.
why
And
are you repeatedly saying closing? Nobody has proposed closing
Or
anything.
okay.
Why do you keep saying that? I'm
I
curious
guess I'm
as to why
thinking,
you
what
are
is the
insisting on
option?
that.
We have to pay
Using
for it to
that
fix
phrase.
it. We have
But
to,
that's-
either we pay for it to fix it and replace it, or we do what?
Repurpose it.
Okay?
So that is a closing option, right?
I mean, yeah, it is.
No, and
Close
it's
it,
totally
you can
legitimate
repurpose
to
it.
mention that as an option.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so.
Leisure activity, what other leisure activities?
I'm not advocating it, but
I'm not advocating it either. I'm just trying to be real about the amount of money we need to spend versus the amount of money we're bringing in. And I'm not okay making a blanket statement that we'll just fix everything and to hell with what it's going to cost the members of the association.
And no one around this table has talked about that. We talk about prioritization of how we spend money and how we fund a repair and replacement fund for the facilities we own. And then there's a huge operating budget that's very separate from that.
They all
we
add
have
up to the
spend.
assessments, Andy.
They all add up.
If you prioritize Lake,
completely
so
agree that they're all
you
part of the assessment.
prioritize Lake Thoreau versus a Dogwood, Hunter's Wood Dogwood facility because that's what you focused on, right? You can't do that unless you push up the assessments. You can't be all things to all people.
I completely agree.
Right?
But there's
So-
prioritization of other things in the operating budget.
Well, like, what are you going to cut?
You're
What are you
right,
gonna
we
cut?
have to go
You've-
through
you've
it.
gone
Whether
through
Is it
the- I
IT?
can-
Is it other things? I don't know.
So then
And there
we
are
don't do
programming
web
things that are in operational.
We have 2 people in IT now. With the
I'm
new
just
person
saying,
actually joined us.
there are operational budgets, things, and there are the facilities we own, the assets we own, and keeping the assets we own in operating order.
And they're
or in
all part of the
safe order.
assessments.
I agree.
Which is
I
where
agree.
the triple R of allocation comes every year. And
But-
we make a determination. If we
Found some
determine
savings
that,
this past year by hiring legal
Yeah.
and in-house, counsel. And I think we identified there were some other areas where we could find some additional savings. So
Yeah, but that was the savings for this past year. So we got to the assessments, we got to lower the assessments for the first time ever in RA history, as
and
we
it's
all
baked
remember.
in.
could I ask,
And we didn't cut services.
I'd like to ask,
Larry, did you get everything you needed?
we also applied money from
I'd like to
cash.
ask Larry and Chris, are there any other capital facilities that face the urgent need for care as much as Lake Thoreau Pool?
I'm going to defer that to Chris, because he's had his hands on capital. I
What if-
can't think of one.
Well,
off
what
the top
about
of my
where we,
head.
Well,
North Hills
well, let's-
tennis, we had to
That's
put the
already
money
approved.
towards
We approved it.
Glade. I know we put the money to Glade, but that didn't mean did we also then
We
approved to
didn't divert the money. I mean, the North Hills money is still allocated, it's encumbered. We're just not using that right now because the Glade is shut down.
Right.
The people want clay court tennis courts to be available during the season, so that's why we've not yet started on North
I know
Hills.
Hook Road identified.
Here's where I'm going. Here's where I'm going. When you do comprehensive planning, it's good to start with a whole, maybe you do another refined part stage in comprehensive planning. It sounds to me like we don't have the luxury of time with Lake Thoreau and possibly with other places to look at the whole. We can do a mini whole, but it sounds like, and I forget who suggested this earlier, but maybe what we have to do is identify those who have a time urgency, where we would perhaps lose more money if we don't address them now. We would end up losing more money over the long term. And so our process maybe should be a mini whole, if we're working with a consultant, and then focus, perhaps we don't even need the consultants to help us do this.
I'd rather not spend the money.
But to deal with the urgent things, and then back off, and then, because time, it's not just money that's a constraint, time is a constraint. And if there's urgency, we have to deal with that.
Okay.
We can't take more time to make a decision than we have.
Okay, so what are we trying to decide now?
So
Okay, let's,
Noted, if I can jump in for a second. In fact, we had a budget kickoff meeting today with the staff, and we didn't address capital. We're going to have a separate meeting on that, where any of the staff who are involved with capital projects, we're going to come back. We're going to look at the initially proposed 2019 list that you all have seen.
Yep.
Yes.
And that is going to change.
Yep.
And it's going to change based upon inspections, needs, things we've identified that need to change. So it goes back to your, the old Larry's list kind of thing. You're going to, as part of the budget process, you're going to get, it's going to look, very similar to what you've already seen, but there's going to be some changes. And those changes are going to be because we've identified them, or our consultants, Dewberry or Kimley Horner, whomever, has identified those as ones, you better address these now, because if you wait longer, it's going to cost you more in the end to fix it. So that's one piece that's going to happen out there. I want to go back to something you said earlier, Sridhar, too, and I think this is something, I'm not going to make any promises yet. I want to talk to my staff first. But the notion of looking at, the facility by facility, I know that's important. And I know there's people in the community who don't use pools. They love tennis, or they,
Sure.
Everybody loves the paddles. Okay, we don't really need to talk about those.
Right.
Although some people would say we should put more money towards them. But our budget is already broken up. If you go through and look at the categories, they're already broken up by and large by facility.
by facility, with the types of.
Rec areas is
amenities,
different, because that covers a lot of other things too. But we can extract out of there the ball field costs.
Yep.
Tennis, and so forth. We'll have to work with you, or, maybe Dave or Ken from the fiscal committee on how you want to allocate the overhead. Just want to, for right now, because we can get those numbers quicker, just work on the direct costs on a by facility basis. But those costs would also include, and I think what we can do is I don't want to say extrapolate, but utilize the existing reserve study to the extent that we can, knowing that it's got some flaws,
Yep.
to
It's a
identify
good start.
the next 2 or 3 years of the capital replacement for ball fields, pools, tennis courts, pathways, et cetera. So I think we can do that exercise as part of the budget process. I'm not going to promise it in 3 weeks or a month, but as part of the budget discussion, we can certainly get there. Because I do think the public will want to weigh in on those things that are their personal priorities.
Yep.
And that might be one way, whether it's at the listening sessions or just in the board meetings when we discuss the budget, to get some feedback on that. So, like I said, I'm not going to promise it to you right now. I want to talk to my staff first. This would have been helpful. I could have had this discussion earlier today, perhaps, but we can do that soon enough to see what kind of break out we can get. But we can certainly do it more finite than what the budget categories currently have, because that would be our starting place, because they're already parceled out.
And then we can go from there. Yeah, sorry.
And just, no, I jumped in, I apologize. I mean, but that was the whole reason we did Financial Resolution 3 updates as we did 4 years ago, so that we didn't have the surprises. We used the capital reserve study to plan out, see what's going on over the next 10 years, and then do a glide of how much needs to be funded in there on on an average basis. So it's not like, oh my God, it's 4 pools this year, so we're going to have to do $5 million. We have to raise assessments. Oh, and next year we'll have to do 1. Oh, maybe we can lower assessments. We said, no, that's a silly way to do this.
Right.
We're going to have a glide path so we know exactly, and there's no surprises. If the reserve study is incorrect, that's a problem. We can't, and obviously, we need to support you so that problem doesn't exist anymore.
And that's what we are trying to
And
fix
so-
through this
and-
exercise.
But that's why we wrote it the way we did, so that there are no surprises and that we're not yanking people saying, oh, should we raise your assessments this year so we can fix the pool? No, we've talked about it for the last 5 years or 10 years about that in 2022, this pool is going to be replaced, and we've been planning for that money for the last 9 years.
Right.
But unfortunately, we're not there.
We are there.
We're not there,
In what sense?
in the sense that the reserve study didn't do what we
You
anticipated.
said the reserve study
It has
broke.
gaps. I'm saying that it just, the estimates weren't all that needed to be.
So,
Right.
so
The
we
premise
need,
is
so
good.
we've got some
we just-
deltas we
we
have
just
to
don't-
deal with.
correct.
We've got some deltas we have to deal with, which were the problem of a faulty study, evidently.
Yeah.
Well,
And so I guess to make the
Or
data point I want to hear then is, what are those deltas?
Yeah. And actually, Andy, if I
do
can,
the 2019 budget,
Yeah.
you'll get those deltas for 2019, and we'll be starting on 2020 because we're looking at things much more in advance.
Yeah.
But for 2019, one of Chris's exercises, along with trying to get through all the projects this year, is to get more accurate numbers of those things that are already forecast in the 2019 budget.
Yeah.
So that we haven't. So we come back to you, and it is a progressive thing. As we get better numbers in, we
you'll
repopulate
populate it.
Yeah.
that draft capital budget. It's a moving document up until the point it's approved. And I will tell you that even after it's approved, Sriyar can tell you, we'll go out and get, actually go out and get 3 formal bids and say, oh, crap, it's 5,000 more than what we had budgeted,
Certainly.
because costs have gone up for that trade or whatever.
And that's
So-
why
so
there's a
I'm-
minimum balance, so that you're never worried about some of that edges.
So to your point, actually, you can go look at the 2018-19 capital projects list. There is a column with reserve study estimate versus new estimate.
New estimate.
So that'll give you a good starting point as to, I'll give you a baseball example. Brown's Chapel this year, we did 2 of them, right? Brown's Chapel, 2 different baseball fields, backstop. The reserve study was $19,689. We spent $77,200 and $77,500, right? You look at Lake and Dock, you'll see a number that was, the reserve study had it at below 500,000, now we are at 800,000+, right? So you will find these items changing between 2017, 18 and 19 already. So that is being captured as part of the, the budget process right now. So we are catching that, which is why the big picture though is the reserve study was, 64 million. But now I expect that to be way higher than that, which means we are collecting from the public on the basis of a rolling forward 64 million plus estimate. But in reality, it could be a lot higher, and at some point we may have to catch up, which is the reason why I would suggest, to Sherry's point, is we step back and take a look at all these, so we present all the information to the public as well.
Certainly.
And say that, this is what it's going to cost, and then, we need, as a public, they should get involved in helping us make the decision. That's why we're all here, right? We're all.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Do we need to legally vote to extend the meeting, or, no, we do not?
Yeah.
Work session, okay.
So, what do we have to walk away from, with today? What do we need to decide?
Were we supposed to be deciding if we are going to approve hiring a consultant to do these studies, as the staff, I think, wanted us to do?
There was no action forecast
Action.
for tonight.
Yeah.
specific action, if the board wants to provide guidance to staff, I mean, I've already agreed what I just said a couple minutes ago, that we can start kind of formatting our expense data. And I'm going to focus right now on the expense data.
That's fine.
Because we're really talking about facility
Backwards and
replacements.
forwards,
John, I respect the
When you say expense, do you mean capital costs or expenses?
operating and capital.
Operating and
Okay.
capital.
So in other words, for ball fields in any given year, we'll say for 2019, we certainly do it for 2018 as is budgeted and what we've already spent. Say, for all of our ball field efforts,
Just what
staffing,
was-
supplies, contractual, et cetera, this is the cost. And if you annualize over the next 5 years what the capital expenses are
Mhm.
for those, I'm just throwing a number out, that the average annual capital expenditure for ball fields is X. So you add that to it. So the total annual expense on ball fields is this
This.
number. And if you divide that by the number of households or the number of users,
Yep.
or whatever.
So then you get a number. If there are 1,000 people using it, then you have a number that says this.
That's the
And if you have 200 people using a lake, then you've got that number. So anyway,
So I can do that, and
Okay.
so I don't want to right now for the sake of this, I don't want to confuse because it is confusing and everybody has different thoughts about it. The programmatic piece
Yeah.
right now. So
Right.
right now I'm just talking about rote facility costs.
Yep.
So that will be my initial focus.
and
That's kind of how this conversation started, and I'd like to keep it there for now. I think it's a much bigger discussion, kind of what you were talking about, and what John mentioned about, the affordability,
Yep.
equitable
Yes,
distribution, all it.
Too much
I
right
just
now.
want to focus
we'll
on
get that. Yeah, you get that, then we'll get to that. And even at the ball fields, right?
I'm
The
leaving.
program,
And I think
Mr.
even to have a good conversation on the latter, you need the data of the former.
yeah. The program actually is picked up by the users, just so, because baseball fields are, you leaving?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah,
okay,
you're
thanks.
welcome.
Like
The baseball fields are used mostly for the baseball, little league programs and soccer fields and, those, right, so.
Okay, so our
Okay.
goal was to finish at 9. We're 20 minutes
Yeah.
past.
So if we don't, do you have
What
your
do you need
information?
from us, Larry? What do you need from us, and when do you need it?
Yeah. Continue to think about data points.
Continue to think about data, yeah. So I'll do this initial breakdown on the by-facility costs, and obviously I'm going to have to involve a number of staff on that. But I still think, kind of on the big picture aspect, most, and John, I respectfully ask for your input on this too, most jurisdictions, and for the sake of our discussion here, Reston is a jurisdiction and we're a big piece of that. When they do planning studies, whether it's for land use or whatever, they look at that. 10 years is sort of a benchmark for that. A lot of places it's 5 years. So we haven't done a comprehensive study in 13 years now.
Yep.
On our facilities, our programs, and so forth. And I think with what Andy said, we know the population is going to grow, and we know that not all of them are going to be our direct members. We know they're going to be in the market for some of our services. How do we get a good grasp on that? My staff can do a lot of that work, but I think we would be well served, and I'm not saying right now, but perhaps in 2019, to have a comprehensive look at our facilities and programs and, using parts of the 2005 as a baseline.
That's
to
too
start
dated,
from.
yeah.
Just as a starting block to say, this is what we did then, we know we can improve upon it. But I want the board to be thinking about that because there's a lot changing in Reston.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of it that is beyond our control.
Yeah.
And we need to have some nimbleness to be able to respond to it.
Okay. No, agree. Yeah. We are going to have a lot of demographic shift.
For
as
what
well.
it's worth, I was reflecting on Mike Sanyo's initiative back in the October, November, on the where do we spend money, tennis ball fields, et cetera. Kind of remember that exercise?
Yeah.
And I just pulled up the email, and there were some data points that Chris had pulled together on that. So if it's of value, I will resend it to
Sure,
you as
yeah.
a reminder of it, and make sure that the 3 new board members have it too.
Okay.
Just as something to read.
Yep. Agreed.
Right.
Okay,
That is my ask of you.
okay,
I've got
okay.
my tasks.
So if we don't have anything else, can I have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.